Nero Wolfe and the Ghosts of Crooked Creek. It was a Monday, October 28th, and the rain was doing what October rain does best in Manhattan, falling in cold, determined sheets that turned West 35th Street into a river of reflected streetlights and misery. I was at my desk in the office, catching up on correspondence and pretending not to notice that Nero Wolfe had been staring at the same page of his orchid catalogue for 20 minutes. The brownstone was buttoned up tight against the weather. Fritz had the heat going, and the bulletproof windows, custom-made with 3 layers of tempered glass and polycarbonate, were beaded with rain on the outside while staying perfectly clear within. Wolfe had insisted on bulletproof mirrors and drinking glasses too, after an incident 3 years back that I won't detail here. The man took his security seriously, which was why the iron-reinforced doors, the custom alarm system, and the dogs made perfect sense. Speaking of the dogs, all 6 were in their usual evening positions. Caesar, the largest Doberman and undisputed alpha of the pack, lay near Wolfe's desk, his massive head resting on his paws, but his dark eyes alert. Mars, nearly as large and considerably more aggressive, was by the office door, the enforcer position. Apollo, the scout, restless and lean, prowled between the hall and the front room. Minerva, the strategist, had claimed the corner near the safe where she could observe everything. Diana, smallest and swiftest of the Dobermans, was curled near the radiator, and Loyal, our 45-pound brick-red pitbull with the white blaze down his chest and the notched ear, sat at my feet, his intelligent brown eyes watching the front door as if he expected something. He was right. The doorbell rang at 9:47 p.m., which was unusual. We weren't expecting anyone, and people who know Wolfe don't drop by unannounced unless they're desperate or stupid. Sometimes both. All 6 dogs' heads came up simultaneously. Caesar rose to his feet with the fluid grace of a predator, and Mars was already at attention. I heard a low rumble from both of them. Not quite a growl, just a warning note. "Easy," I said, through the bulletproof glass panel beside the door. Another of Wolfe's security measures. I could see a figure hunched against the rain. Male, medium height, wearing a soaked overcoat and no hat. His hands were visible and empty, which was good. I checked the security camera feed on the small monitor Fritz had installed last month. 1 person alone, no visible weapons. I opened the door. The man practically fell across the threshold, bringing a gust of cold rain with him. He was in his 50s, with grey hair plastered to his skull and eyes that had seen something they wished they hadn't. His hands were shaking. "Mr. Wolfe?" he gasped. "I need to see Mr. Nero Wolfe, please," they said. They said he's the only one who can help. Caesar had moved to within 3 feet of the stranger. His hackles not quite raised, but his posture making his opinion clear. Unknown human, potential threat, awaiting orders. Mars flanked him on the right. Apollo circled behind, cutting off retreat. The 3 of them formed a perfect tactical triangle, without any command from me. "It's all right," I told them, though I kept my hand near the Pork 32 in my shoulder holster. "You can back off." They held position for another 3 seconds, Caesar's call, then relaxed fractionally. Loyal had moved forward too, but stayed beside me, watching with those thoughtful brown eyes. "I'm Archie Goodwin," I said to the dripping stranger. "Mr. Wolfe doesn't see people at this hour without an appointment. If you want to tell me what this is about, I can determine if it's something that might interest him." The man fumbled inside his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. His hands shook as he unwrapped it. An old ledger, leather-bound, its pages swollen from water damage, despite the protective covering. "My name is Theodore Kincaid," he said. His voice was steadier now, though his eyes kept darting to the dogs. "I'm the caretaker of the Ashford property in Crooked Creek. That's upstate, near the Adirondacks. 3 days ago, Mr. Wolfe, a man was killed there, murdered, and the legend says..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "The legend says the ghosts have returned." I took the ledger from his trembling hands and noted several things immediately. The leather was old, probably late 1800s. The binding was quality work, and there, on the cover in faded gold leaf, was a name, Blackwood. That got my attention. It should have gotten yours too, if you know anything about unsolved inheritance cases from the Hudson Valley. The Blackwood fortune vanished in 1891, along with 3 family members, and nobody had found a trace of it since. "Wait here," I said. I left him standing in the hall with Mars positioned between him and any possible escape route and went to the office. Wolfe had finally looked up from his catalogue. Archie. The man in the hall is creating a puddle on Fritz's clean floor. The man in the hall brought us a Blackwood ledger and a murder in a place called Crooked Creek. Also ghosts, allegedly. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Blackwood. The same, or so the cover suggests. He was silent for a moment, his eyes distant. I knew that look. He was accessing that phenomenal memory of his, pulling up some obscure reference from years of reading. Then bring him in, and bring the ledger. I fetched Theodore Kincaid, who left a trail of water across the hall carpet despite Fritz's earlier effort with the mop. Caesar, Mars and Apollo followed at a distance, professional security, canine style. The man's eyes went wide when he entered the office and saw Nero Wolfe behind his desk. Wolfe is not a small man, a seventh of a ton, as I like to remind him when he's being particularly difficult. He sat in his custom-made chair like a Buddha carved from flesh, wearing his usual yellow shirt and tie. His massive head turned to regard our visitor with the expression he reserves for people who interrupt his routine. "Sit," Wolfe said, not to the man, to the dogs. All 6 of them promptly arranged themselves in their assigned positions around the office. Loyal chose the spot between my desk and Wolfe's, equidistant from both of us. The man gaped. "They're remarkably well trained," Kincaid whispered. "They're remarkably intelligent," Wolfe corrected. "Mr. Kincaid, I understand you have brought me something that bears the name Blackwood. That name appears in precisely one notation in my files, from a newspaper article I read 11 years ago about a missing inheritance in the Hudson Valley region. The article mentioned that 3 members of the Blackwood family vanished in October of 1891, along with an estimated fortune of $200,000, approximately $6 million in current valuation. No bodies were ever found, no money was ever recovered, and the case was never solved. Am I correct?" Kincaid's jaw had gone slack. "Yes, exactly right. How did you?" "I read," Wolfe said simply. "Continue with your account. You mentioned a recent murder. Details, please. Exclude the supernatural." Kincaid gathered himself. "The Ashford family bought the Blackwood property in 1923. They've maintained it as a hunting lodge and summer retreat for the last 32 years. I've been the caretaker for 18 years. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Leonard Ashford, the current heir, arrived at the property with instructions to prepare it for a family gathering. He wanted the entire lodge ready for October 31st, Halloween. He said it was time to settle old business." "And the murder?" I prompted. 3 nights ago, Friday the 25th, I found Mr. Ashford dead in the main hall of the lodge. He was lying beneath the chandelier, and Kincaid's voice dropped to a whisper, and there were 3 candles arranged around his body. Black candles, still burning. Each one had a symbol carved into the wax, the same symbol that appears. He pointed to the ledger I'd placed on Wolfe's desk. In that ledger, on page 17, Wolfe opened the book carefully. The pages were brittle and water-stained, but the ink had held. He turned pages slowly, his eyes moving with precision. When he reached page 17, he stopped. I got up to look. There, in the margin of what appeared to be a list of property transfers, was a symbol carved or pressed into the dried wax that had once sealed the page. A circle with 3 lines radiating from its center, and a small cross at each terminus. "The triple cross of Crooked Creek," Kincaid said quietly. "It's the mark of the Blackwood ghosts. According to legend, when they return to claim what was stolen from them, they mark their victims with this symbol. 3 candles, 3 crosses, 3 deaths. That's what the old stories say." "Phooey," Wolfe said, which is his way of expressing maximum disgust. "Ghosts do not exist, Mr. Kincaid. They do not light candles, carve symbols, or commit murders. Living people do those things. What did the police conclude?" "That's the problem, Mr. Wolfe. The county sheriff, a man named Dunlap, ruled it an accident. He said Mr. Ashford must have hit his head on the stone hearth. But I saw the body, I saw the candles, and I saw," he paused as if ashamed of what he was about to admit, "I saw footprints in the dust leading to the attic. Fresh footprints, but when I went up there, the floor was undisturbed, covered in years of dust with no tracks at all." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, which creaked softly. "You came to New York to engage my services. Why?" Kincaid reached into his wet coat again and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Because yesterday morning I found this nailed to the front door of the lodge. It's addressed to you." Wolfe took the envelope with the tips of his fingers, as if it might contaminate him. The paper was heavy stock, yellowed with age, and the seal was red wax, stamped with the same symbol from the ledger, the triple cross of Crooked Creek. The handwriting on the front was precise, old-fashioned copperplate, to Mr. Nero Wolfe, Detective, New York City. "This letter is addressed to me specifically," Wolfe said slowly. "Yet I have never heard of Crooked Creek except in one obscure newspaper article, and I have certainly never been engaged on any matter relating to the Blackwood family or the Ashford property. How is this possible?" "I don't know, sir," Kincaid said miserably, "but when I saw your name, I knew I had to bring it to you. The family, what's left of them, they're arriving at the lodge tomorrow. All of them, for the Halloween gathering that Mr. Leonard arranged before he died. I'm afraid," his voice cracked, "I'm afraid there will be more deaths." Wolfe broke the seal and unfolded the letter. I moved behind his desk to read over his shoulder. The paper was old, brittle, and the ink had faded to brown, but the words were clear. October 23rd, 1891. To the detective who will come. By the time this letter reaches you, I will be dead. So will my brother Harrison and my sister Constance. We will have been murdered by one of our own blood, and our fortune will have been stolen. But the truth is hidden in the place where three waters meet, and the proof is sealed in iron. I know you will come because the pattern cannot be stopped now. 3 deaths in 1891. 3 deaths in 1955. The curse repeats itself every 64 years, when the All Hallows moon rises full over Crooked Creek. Find the iron box, count the crosses, follow the water, and beware the one who loved us most. Jeremiah Blackwood. The room was very quiet. Even the rain seemed to have paused. Caesar, who had been resting near Wolfe's desk, lifted his head and looked at me, then at Wolfe, as if asking, "Do we take this case?" Wolfe folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk. "Mr. Kincaid, this letter is dated 1891, yet you claim it was nailed to the door yesterday morning. Are you asking me to believe that a dead man posted correspondence 64 years after writing it?" "I'm not asking you to believe anything, Mr. Wolfe. I'm asking you to come to Crooked Creek and find out who killed Mr. Leonard Ashford, before they kill again. You mentioned that the remaining family members are arriving tomorrow. How many?" Kincaid pulled a damp notebook from his pocket and consulted it. 6 people, sir. Mrs. Helena Ashford, Leonard's widow, his son Marcus, and daughter-in-law Iris, his sister Beatrice Holloway, and her husband Rupert, and the family attorney, a Mr. Pemberton Cross. They're all coming for the reading of the will, which is scheduled for Halloween night at midnight. Leonard specified that in his instructions. "A melodramatic touch," Wolfe observed. "Reading a will at midnight on Halloween. Someone has been watching too many motion pictures. Or setting a trap," I suggested. "If the pattern repeats every 64 years, and 3 Blackwoods died in 1891, then 3 people are supposed to die now. Leonard was the first. Who are the next 2 targets?" Wolfe's eyes fixed on me. "An excellent question, Archie. One that requires an answer." He turned back to Kincaid. "Where precisely is Crooked Creek?" "In the Adirondacks, sir. About 4 hours north of the city. The lodge is isolated. The nearest town is 15 miles away. There's only one road in, and it's not maintained in winter. We're at the confluence of 3 streams that form the creek, hence the name. There's a waterfall behind the lodge, about 40 feet high. The sound of it is constant. Some people find it peaceful. Others," he shuddered, "others say it sounds like voices." "Flowing water makes noise," Wolfe said flatly. "It does not speak. Mr. Kincaid, I must consider your proposal carefully. I do not leave my home lightly, and certainly not to chase phantoms in the wilderness. However, the Blackwood mystery is intriguing, and if there is indeed a genuine murder as opposed to Sheriff Dunlap's accidental death theory, then justice requires investigation. Return here tomorrow at 11 a.m. I will have a decision for you then." Kincaid rose, his face showing relief despite the dismissal. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Thank you, I'll be here." He glanced at the dogs, all of whom were watching him with professional interest. "Are they, will they?" "The dogs go where I go," Wolfe said. "If I accept this case, and I have not yet decided, they will accompany us to Crooked Creek. Mars, Apollo, show Mr. Kincaid to the door." The 2 Dobermans rose and flanked the visitor, escorting him to the hall with the precision of a military honor guard. I heard the front door open and close, then the sound of Fritz's mop attacking the water trail again. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was holding the letter up to the light, examining the paper and ink. Minerva had moved closer to his desk, her intelligent eyes following his movements. "Well," I said, "are we going ghost hunting?" "We are not," Wolfe said firmly. "Ghosts do not exist. However, I am intrigued by several aspects of this case. First, the letter is genuine. The paper, ink, and writing style are all consistent with the 1890s. Second, it was written by someone who expected to be murdered and who anticipated that their killer would not be caught. Third, the reference to the pattern suggests premeditation on a 64-year cycle. Fourth, and most interesting, is the phrase, "Beware the one who loved us most." That suggests the murderer was someone close to the family. "Someone who's been dead for 64 years, I pointed out. "The original murderer, yes, but murders have a habit of inspiring imitators, especially when money is involved. You heard Mr. Kincaid. The Blackwood fortune was never recovered. $200,000 in 1891 would be worth approximately $6 million today, possibly more if wisely invested. That's a considerable motive. So we're going." Wolfe sighed, a sound like a whale surfacing. "Against my better judgment, yes. Make the arrangements, Archie. We'll need transportation for 8. You, me, Fritz, Saul and the dogs. Contact Saul and ask him to meet us here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Tell Fritz we'll need provisions for at least 3 days, possibly a week, and call that garage that specializes in large vehicles. We'll need something that can transport all of us comfortably. And withstand upstate October weather," I added. "What about weapons? Bring what you think necessary. I doubt we'll encounter anything more dangerous than human stupidity, but I prefer to be prepared." He glanced at Caesar, who was watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "The dogs at least will be useful. They don't believe in ghosts either." I spent the next hour making calls and arrangements. Saul Panzer, the best freelance operative in New York, agreed to meet us tomorrow morning without asking questions. That's why he's the best. The garage had a custom van that could seat 8 humans and 6 large dogs with room for luggage. Fritz started making a list of supplies with the same precision he brings to his cooking, and I checked my .32, my backup .25, and the rifle I keep locked in my closet for special occasions. At 11:30, Wolfe announced he was going up to bed. "We leave at 9 a.m. sharp, Archie. Try not to oversleep." "Yes, sir. Sweet dreams. Don't let the ghosts bite." He gave me a look that would have curdled milk, then headed for the elevator with Caesar, Mars, and Minerva as his escort. The remaining 3 dogs, Apollo, Diana, and Loyal, stayed with me in the office. I sat at my desk and examined the Blackwood ledger more carefully. Most of it was routine business entries, property transactions, payments made, debts recorded. But on page 17, below the wax seal and symbol, there was a notation in different ink. 3 waters meet at the fall. 3 crosses mark the way. 3 deaths seal the secret. Iron holds the truth. Below that, in the same hand, HB Oct Munder Tui Thude. Wadetown Tev 23. 1891. Harrison Blackwood, presumably. One of the 3 who vanished. I looked down at Loyal, who had moved closer to my chair. His notched ear and white chest blaze gave him a rakish appearance, but his eyes were serious. "What do you think, boy? Are we walking into a trap, or are we about to solve a 64-year-old murder?" He cocked his head, considering. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the rain, his whole posture alert and focused. Watching, waiting, ready. Smart dog. I closed the ledger, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to pack. Tomorrow we were going to Crooked Creek, where 3 people had vanished without a trace, where ghosts allegedly walked, and where at least 1 person had recently died under suspicious circumstances. It was going to be an interesting Halloween. Tuesday morning broke grey and cold, with the rain reduced to a thin drizzle that made Manhattan look like an impressionist painting in shades of charcoal. By 8 a.m., the brownstone was organized chaos, the good kind, where everyone knew their job and did it without unnecessary chatter. Fritz had packed enough food to sustain a small army. Cold roast beef, bread he'd baked at 5 a.m., 3 varieties of cheese, fruit, thermoses of coffee, and something wrapped in waxed paper that smelled like heaven and cinnamon. He'd also prepared special provisions for the dogs, their usual high-quality kibble mixed with supplements, plus extra portions of the beef heart and liver they preferred. Saul Panzer arrived at 8:15, looking like he'd just stepped out of a haberdashery advertisement despite the weather. Saul is short, wiry, and possesses a face that people forget 10 seconds after meeting him, which is exactly why he's so valuable. He can blend into any crowd, follow anyone without being noticed, and extract information from sources who don't even realize they're being interrogated. "Morning, Archie," he said, shaking the rain off his coat. "Mr. Wolfe filled me in on the phone. Ghosts, murders, and missing millions. Sounds like Tuesday." "Actually, it's Tuesday," I said. "Wait." I checked my watch. No, I'd been tracking the days wrong. Monday was yesterday. Today was Tuesday, October 29th. I made a mental note to be more careful about calendar management when dead people start writing letters. The van arrived at 8:45, a custom job with 3 rows of seats, reinforced suspension, and enough cargo space for luggage, and 6 large dogs. The driver, a man named Kowalski, who'd worked with us before, helped me load the gear, while Fritz supervised the food placement with the intensity of a general planning an invasion. At precisely 9 a.m., Wolfe descended in the elevator, wearing his brown suit, yellow shirt, and a traveling coat that made him look like a prosperous businessman heading upstate for a hunting trip. Which in a way he was, though his quarry was human. The dogs knew something unusual was happening. They'd been watching the preparations with interest, and when I opened the van's rear door, all 6 of them filed in with military precision. Caesar took the back left position, Mars the back right. Apollo and Minerva settled in the middle row. Diana claimed a spot near the front, and Loyal, after a careful survey of available positions, chose the space between the 2 rows where he could observe everything. Fritz took the front passenger seat with his food supplies protected in a specially prepared box. Saul and I settled in the middle row with Apollo and Minerva bracketing us like bookends. Wolfe climbed into the captain's chair in the second row, where he had maximum space and visibility. Caesar shifted position to be directly behind him, the Alpha protecting his charge. "Everyone secure?" Kowalski asked from the driver's seat. "Proceed," Wolfe said, "but drive carefully. If any of these animals are injured due to reckless operation of this vehicle, you'll answer to me." "Yes, sir, Mr. Wolfe. I've driven harder cargoes than dogs. We'll take it nice and easy." We pulled away from West 35th Street at 9:17 a.m. The city traffic was its usual insane ballet of taxis, trucks, and pedestrians with death wishes. Minerva pressed her nose against the bulletproof glass window and watched with fascination while Apollo maintained his alert scout posture, head swiveling to track potential threats. Once we hit the Sawmill River Parkway, heading north, the traffic thinned and the landscape began its transformation from urban to suburban to rural. The rain had stopped, but low clouds clung to the hills like smoke, and the trees were ablaze with October color, reds, oranges, yellows, and deep burgundies that looked almost painful in their intensity. Wolfe spent the first hour reading from a book he'd brought, The History of the Upper Hudson Valley, 1850. I'd seen him pull it from his shelves before we left, which meant he'd been planning this level of research since last night. At 10:30, I broke the silence. "Want to share what you've learned about Crooked Creek?" He marked his place and closed the book. The settlement was established in 1847 by Dutch and German immigrants seeking timber and farmland. By 1880, it had grown to approximately 200 residents, including several wealthy families who built summer estates in the area. The Blackwoods arrived in 1876 and quickly established themselves as the dominant family, controlling the local mill, the general store, and several thousand acres of forest land. "Not bad for newcomers," Saul observed. Indeed, Jeremiah Blackwood, according to this account, was a shrewd businessman, but an unpopular man. He foreclosed on several properties during the economic panic of 1884, which created considerable resentment among his neighbors. His siblings Harrison and Constance were better liked. Harrison was known for his generosity to the local church, and Constance organized charitable work among the poor families. But all 3 vanished, I said. October 1891. Were there any suspects? The local authorities investigated briefly, but concluded that the Blackwoods had fled to avoid creditors. However, this theory made little sense given their wealth. The more likely explanation suggested by the county sheriff at the time was murder, possibly by someone who bore a grudge. But without bodies, no charges could be filed. And the money? Vanished with them. The Blackwood accounts were emptied in late October 1891, but no record exists of where the funds went. The estate itself was tied up in legal disputes for 3 decades before being sold to the Ashford family in From the back, Caesar made a soft sound, not quite a growl, more like a question. Wolfe turned slightly in his seat. Yes, I know. None of this explains the letter supposedly written by Jeremiah Blackwood predicting his own murder and somehow arriving at the lodge yesterday morning, 64 years after his death. That anomaly troubles me considerably. Could someone have forged it? Saul asked. The paper and ink are authentic to the period, Wolfe said. I examined them carefully last night. Either the letter is genuine, which raises impossible questions about how it was preserved and delivered, or someone went to extraordinary lengths to create a convincing forgery using century-old materials. Both possibilities are disturbing. We drove on. The landscape grew wilder as we left the suburbs behind. The roads narrowed, the hills steepened, and the forest crowded close on either side. By noon, we were deep in the Adirondacks, following a two-lane highway that wound through stands of pine, oak, and maple. Loyal had been quiet for most of the journey, but as we passed a small creek running parallel to the road, he stood up and pressed his nose against the window, his whole body tense with interest. He smells water, Fritz said from the front. Dogs are sensitive to changes in the environment. He knows we're approaching something. 10 minutes later, Kowalski slowed the van and turned onto a dirt road, barely wide enough for our vehicle. A weathered sign, half hidden by overgrown brush, read, Crooked Creek, private property. This is it, I said. No turning back now. The road descended through thick forest for another 2 miles, growing rougher and more primitive with each passing minute. Branches scraped against the van's sides. Potholes large enough to swallow a tire forced Kowalski to navigate like a ship captain, avoiding reefs. The dogs remained alert but calm, except for Loyal, whose attention was fixed forward, his ears pricked and his eyes bright. Then we heard it, a deep, constant rumbling that grew louder as we descended. Water, a lot of it. The road curved sharply, and suddenly we emerged into a clearing. Before us stood Crooked Creek Lodge. It was magnificent and eerie in equal measure. A 3-story structure built from massive logs, with a steep roof and stone chimneys at either end. The windows were dark and empty. Moss grew on the northern wall, and behind the lodge, visible through the trees, was the waterfall, a white cascade that dropped 40 feet from a rocky shelf into a pool that fed the creek below. The sound was indeed constant, a roar that drowned out everything else. But what caught my attention first was the figure standing on the lodge's front porch. Theodore Kincaid was waiting for us, and he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a tall woman in a dark coat, her hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been handsome if it had ever learned to smile. She watched our van approach with eyes that suggested she was calculating our collective net worth and finding it disappointing. Kowalski pulled up near the porch and killed the engine. The sudden silence, except for the waterfall's roar, was jarring. "Welcome to Crooked Creek, Mr. Wolfe," Kincaid called out. "I'm glad you came." Wolfe descended from the van with surprising grace for a man of his bulk. The dogs filed out after him, each one immediately surveying the terrain with professional interest. Caesar moved to the front, establishing his position as pack leader. Mars flanked Wolfe's right side. The others spread out in a protective formation that would have made a military tactical instructor proud. The woman on the porch looked at the dogs with something between alarm and disdain. "Mr. Kincaid, you didn't mention that Mr. Wolfe would be bringing wildlife." "What? These are working dogs, madam," Wolfe said coolly, "highly trained and utterly reliable. They go where I go. If that's unacceptable, we'll turn around and return to New York immediately." She considered him for a long moment, her eyes cold. "I am Beatrice Holloway, sister of the late Leonard Ashford. This property now belongs to the family trust, of which I am a trustee. I suppose we can accommodate your menagerie under the circumstances, but they're to be kept under control at all times." "They are always under control," Wolfe replied, "a condition I wish applied equally to all humans in my acquaintance." I suppressed a grin. Beatrice Holloway's face suggested she wasn't accustomed to being contradicted, and she definitely wasn't accustomed to being compared unfavorably to dogs. Saul and I unloaded the luggage while Fritz supervised the transfer of his precious food supplies. Kincaid hurried down from the porch to help, avoiding eye contact with Mrs. Holloway. "The others arrived 2 hours ago," Kincaid said quietly. "Mrs. Helena Ashford, Marcus and Iris, Rupert Holloway, and Mr. Cross the attorney. They're all inside. There's been tension." What kind of tension? I asked. The kind that comes from people who don't like each other being trapped in an isolated lodge while waiting for a will to be read. Marcus has been drinking. His wife Iris keeps wandering through the rooms looking at everything like she's taking inventory. Rupert Holloway spent an hour examining the property boundaries with surveying equipment, and Helena, the widow, she just sits in the main hall staring at the spot where her husband died. Charming family gathering, I muttered. Loyal had trotted ahead to the porch steps and was sniffing carefully at each one. When he reached the top, he paused, looked back at me, and then sat down. A clear signal. Found something. Alert. I walked up to join him. The wood of the top step was stained dark, and there were scratches in the surface that looked fresh. Claw marks? No. These were too regular, too deliberate. More like something had been dragged across the step. Something sharp. Kincaid, I called. What made these marks? He came over, followed by Saul. I don't know, they weren't there yesterday. I swept this porch myself in the afternoon. So someone or something made them last night, Saul said. He knelt down for a closer look. Definitely deliberate. See how they form a pattern. Almost like the symbol, I finished. The scratches, when viewed from the right angle, formed the same triple cross pattern we'd seen in the ledger and on the wax seal of the letter. Beatrice Holloway had come down from the porch. She looked at the marks, and for the first time I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. "They're back," she whispered. "Dear God, the ghosts have returned." The interior of Crooked Creek Lodge was a testament to rustic wealth, the kind of place where New York money met wilderness ambition and created something both impressive and slightly unsettling. The main hall rose 2 stories high, with exposed beams supporting the vaulted ceiling and a stone fireplace large enough to roast an entire elk. Mounted animal heads decorated the walls: deer, bear, a magnificent moose with an impressive rack. The furniture was heavy, masculine, and expensive. And there, in the center of the room, was the spot where Leonard Ashford had died. Someone had scrubbed the floor. I could smell the lye soap, but you could still see the faint outline of where a body had lain. More interesting were the 3 circular marks in the wooden floor, each about 6 inches in diameter and spaced in a triangle around the central stain. The wax residue was still visible. Wolfe stood in the doorway surveying the scene, with Caesar at his left and Mars at his right. The other dogs had spread out through the hall, conducting their own investigation. Loyal went directly to the floor marks and sniffed carefully at each one, then sat down between the 2nd and 3rd circles and looked at me. "Found something important. Need you to see." I walked over and knelt beside him. The wax residue was black, consistent with Kincaid's account of black candles, but there was something else, a faint chemical smell, almost medicinal. I touched the residue carefully and brought my finger close to my nose. Camphor, and something else, something acrid and bitter. "Saul," I called, "bring the evidence kit from my bag." While he retrieved it, I examined the floor more carefully. The scratches forming the triple cross pattern continued here, carved into the wooden planks beneath where each candle had stood. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to stage this scene. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made all 6 dogs turn their attention upward. Caesar moved forward, positioning himself between Wolfe and the potential threat. A man descended into view, mid-30s, handsome in a dissolute way, with dark hair and the kind of tan that comes from yacht clubs rather than honest labor. He held a glass of whiskey that was definitely not his first of the day. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying the careful enunciation of someone trying to mask intoxication. "The famous detective arrives with his circus. I'm Marcus Ashford. This was my father's lodge, which means it's now mine, or will be, after the will is read. Do you normally travel with a dog pack, Mr. Wolfe, or is this special for Halloween?" "I travel with appropriate security," Wolfe said. "Given that your father was recently murdered here, I should think you'd appreciate the precaution." Marcus's face darkened. "Murdered? Is that what Kincaid told you?" "My father had an accident. He was drunk, fell, hit his head. End of story. The sheriff ruled it accidental death." "The sheriff," Wolfe said evenly, "may have been mistaken. Tell me, Mr. Ashford, where were you on the night of October 25th? "Excuse me?" "A simple question. Your father died that night. I'm curious about your whereabouts." Marcus drained his glass in one swallow. "I was in New York. at the Harvard Club until midnight, then home to my apartment on Park Avenue. My doorman can confirm I arrived at 12:45 a.m. My wife was already there. She'd gone home early with a headache. We were both in bed by 1 a.m., and I have the hangover to prove it. But you weren't here, I pointed out. You didn't arrive until today. That's quite a coincidence, given that your father supposedly arranged this whole family gathering before he died. My father arranged a lot of things without consulting me, Marcus said bitterly. He was good at that. Controlling bastard even in death. He looked at the stain on the floor, and for a moment something that might have been genuine grief flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by his practiced sneer. But sure, bring in your fancy detective and his trained wolves. Solve the great mystery. Maybe you'll find out who really killed him, or maybe you'll just prove that he finally drank himself into an accident, like I've been saying all along. He turned and headed back upstairs, weaving slightly. We heard a door slam. Charming young man, Wolfe observed, full of filial devotion. Beatrice Holloway had been standing near the fireplace, watching this exchange with a face like carved ice. Now she approached, her movements precise and controlled. My nephew has been a disappointment to this family for years, Mr. Wolfe. He drinks, gambles, and has gone through most of his trust fund. My brother Leonard tried to impose some discipline, but Marcus resented him for it. However, Marcus is correct about one thing. Leonard's death was accidental. The sheriff examined the scene thoroughly and found no evidence of foul play. Sheriff Dunlap, Wolfe said. Yes, I would very much like to speak with him. Is he available? He's due to arrive this evening for the will reading. My brother specified in his final instructions that the sheriff should be present as a witness. How convenient. And the other family members, where are they? Helena is resting in the master bedroom upstairs. The journey exhausted her. Iris is in the library, I believe. My husband Rupert is outside examining the property. He's concerned about the boundaries and easements. And Mr. Cross, the attorney, is in the study reviewing documents. She paused. I should warn you, Mr. Wolfe, this family has its share of secrets, but none of them involve ghosts or supernatural nonsense. Whatever Mr. Kincaid has told you about legends and curses is the superstitious fantasy of a simple man. My brother died in an unfortunate accident, and that's all there is to it. Then why, Wolfe asked softly, did your brother arrange for this gathering on Halloween night? Why specify midnight for the will reading? And why did he instruct Kincaid to prepare the lodge for what he called settling old business? Those are not the actions of a man planning to die accidentally. Beatrice Holloway's composure cracked for just an instant. I don't know. Leonard could be dramatic. Perhaps he wanted one final performance. Or perhaps, Wolfe suggested, he knew something worth killing to keep quiet. She drew herself up. I've given you permission to investigate, Mr. Wolfe, despite my personal belief that you're wasting your time. But I won't stand here and listen to wild speculation. Leonard is dead. Nothing you do will change that. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. Fritz had been waiting patiently near the entrance with our luggage. Now he cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe, perhaps we should see about accommodations. The dogs will need space, and I'll need to examine the kitchen facilities. An excellent suggestion. Mr. Kincaid, show us to our rooms, please. Kincaid led us up the stairs to the second floor, where a long hallway branched left and right. The lodge had 12 bedrooms, he explained, though only 8 were currently in use. He'd prepared 3 rooms for us on the right wing, away from the family quarters. Wolfe's room was the largest, with a massive bed, a writing desk, and windows that overlooked the waterfall. Perfect, Wolfe said. The sound of water will help me think. Archie, take the room next to mine. Saul, you're on the other side. Fritz will share with you. We'll need to coordinate movements carefully, and I want both of you in one location. And the dogs? Kincaid asked nervously. They'll distribute themselves as they see fit. Caesar, Mars, and Minerva typically stay with me. The others will watch the hallway and other strategic positions. Don't worry, Mr. Kincaid. They won't disturb you unless you give them reason. We spent the next hour settling in. Fritz investigated the kitchen and declared it adequate, though the previous cook had clearly been a barbarian with no respect for proper technique. Saul did a security sweep of our wing, noting exits, windows, and potential vulnerabilities. I unpacked our gear, including the weapons, and set up a small communications center in my room. The dogs, as predicted, deployed themselves strategically. Caesar took up position in Wolfe's room, lying near the door where he could monitor the hallway. Mars settled in the hallway itself, blocking access to our wing. Apollo patrolled between Saul's room and the stairs. Minerva claimed a spot near the large window at the end of the hall, where she had a view of the front approach. Diana, the fastest, positioned herself near the back stairs, ready to respond quickly to any threat. And Loyal. He surprised me by choosing neither my room nor Wolfe's. Instead, he went to the main stairs and descended alone, heading toward the ground floor. I followed quietly and watched as he walked through the main hall, past the death scene, and out the back door that Kincaid had left propped open. Through the window I saw him trot toward the waterfall, his red coat bright against the grey autumn landscape. He reached the pool at the base of the falls and began working his way along the rocky shore, nose down, searching. Smart dog. Following water, just like the letter said, 3 waters meet at the fall. I made a mental note to join him there later for a more thorough investigation. But first I wanted to meet the rest of the family and get a sense of who we were dealing with. I found Iris Ashford in the library, a cozy room lined with books and dominated by a massive oak table. She was standing at the window, looking out at the forest, and she didn't turn when I entered, though she must have heard me. "Mrs. Ashford, just Iris, please." She turned, and I got my first good look at Marcus's wife, early 30s, attractive in a brittle way, with blonde hair styled too perfectly for a rustic hunting lodge, and eyes that were taking in every detail of my appearance with calculating interest. "You're Mr. Goodwin, the detective's assistant. Theodore mentioned you were coming, along with quite a lot of dogs." "6, I confirmed. "All friendly, as long as you are." "I'm always friendly," she said, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Tell me, Mr. Goodwin, does Mr. Wolfe really believe my father-in-law was murdered? Because that would be inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" For the will reading. "If there's a murder investigation, won't that complicate things? Freeze assets, delay distributions, all that tedious legal business?" "It might," I said carefully, "concerned about your inheritance, Mrs. Ashford." "Shouldn't I be? Marcus and I have been living on expectations for the past 3 years, waiting for Leonard to finally release some of the trust funds. Now that he's dead." She stopped, perhaps realizing how that sounded. "I mean, now that he's passed, we're hoping to receive what should have been Marcus's all along. His father was impossibly controlling about money." "What about the legend?" I asked. "The ghosts of Crooked Creek. Does that concern you?" She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Ghosts? Please. I'm from Connecticut, Mr. Goodwin. We don't believe in supernatural nonsense. Leonard died because he was careless and drunk, and if Mr. Wolfe has been hired to prove otherwise, he's wasting everyone's time." She moved toward the door, pausing as she passed me. "But do give him a message for me. If he finds any money during his investigation, I expect to be notified immediately. Leonard hid things, valuable things. This family has learned that the hard way." She left, trailing expensive perfume and barely concealed greed. I was about to follow when a man emerged from the shadows at the back of the library, where I hadn't noticed him standing. He was about 60, thin and grey, wearing a 3-piece suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. "Mr. Goodwin, I presume. Pemberton Cross, attorney for the Ashford estate. I apologize for eavesdropping, but I'm afraid Mrs. Ashford's assessment of the situation is incomplete." "Incomplete how?" He set his briefcase on the oak table and opened it carefully. Leonard Ashford was many things, controlling, secretive, even paranoid in his later years. But he wasn't careless. 3 weeks ago, he contacted me and provided very specific instructions for his will. He anticipated, Cross paused, choosing his words carefully, that his death might appear accidental, but he wanted it investigated thoroughly if certain conditions were met. "What conditions?" "The presence of black candles arranged in a specific pattern, the appearance of the triple cross symbol, and most importantly, if his death occurred during the October full moon in a year divisible by 64. Cross pulled out a document and laid it on the table. 2025 minus 1891 equals 134 years. But the legend specifies 64-year cycles, Mr. Goodwin. That's twice in this period. The first would have been in 19... No deaths occurred then that we know of. But now we're in the second cycle. 2025 is divisible by 64 when you subtract from the base year of 1891. Leonard understood the mathematics. He expected something to happen. Did he know who might kill him? If he did, he didn't tell me. But he left very clear instructions. If he died under these circumstances, I was to contact the most reputable detective I could find and offer full cooperation. He also specified that Mr. Nero Wolfe was his preference, should Mr. Wolfe be willing to travel. It seems Leonard had followed Mr. Wolfe's career with interest. That explained the letter addressed specifically to Wolfe. Leonard Ashford had prepared it, using the old Blackwood letter as a template or forgery, knowing it would intrigue Wolfe enough to bring him to Crooked Creek. You said Leonard was paranoid. I said, about what? Cross hesitated. About the past. About secrets buried when this property was purchased in 1923. About money that was never accounted for and people who disappeared without explanation. Leonard spent the last 5 years of his life researching the Blackwood family. He became obsessed with finding their lost fortune, and 3 weeks ago, he called me in great excitement. He said he'd finally figured it out, where the money was hidden, how to find it, and why the Blackwoods had to die. He was going to reveal everything on Halloween night. But someone killed him first. Yes, Mr. Goodwin, someone killed him first. And now we're all gathered here, waiting for midnight on Halloween, when the will shall be read and Leonard's final secrets revealed. If there's a murderer among us, Cross closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. Then I suggest Mr. Wolfe works quickly, because according to the legend, 2 more people are going to die before All Saints' Day. I found Wolfe in his room, settled in a chair by the window with a book and a glass of beer that Fritz had somehow conjured from the kitchen supplies. Caesar lay at his feet, and Minerva had joined them, her elegant head resting on Wolfe's left shoe. Through the window, the waterfall provided a constant background roar that was either soothing or maddening, depending on your temperament. Archie, report. I summarized my conversations with Marcus, Iris, and Attorney Cross. Wolfe listened without interrupting, his eyes half closed in that meditative state that means his brain is working at full capacity. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then, the pattern becomes clearer. Leonard Ashford believed he had solved the Blackwood mystery. He planned to reveal his findings on Halloween night, during the will reading. Someone, presumably a family member or close associate, killed him to prevent that revelation. The stage scene with the candles and symbols was meant to invoke the old legend and suggest supernatural causes, discouraging investigation. But Leonard anticipated exactly that, I said. He left instructions for Cross to hire you specifically. He wanted you to investigate. A dead man's final performance, Wolfe mused. Dramatic, perhaps even vain, but potentially effective. However, our situation remains precarious. We're in an isolated location with a murderer who has demonstrated both cunning and ruthlessness. More concerning is the timing. If Leonard is correct about the 64-year cycle, and if the murderer truly intends to follow the pattern, 2 more deaths are scheduled before November 1st. That gives us less than 3 days. Halloween is October 31st, I said. Tomorrow, we'll reading at midnight. Perfect timing for murder number 2 and 3. Precisely, which means we must work quickly and carefully. First, I want to examine the location where Leonard's body was found. The main hall is too public. We'll do that later. Second, I want to see the waterfall more closely. Loyal has been investigating there, and his instincts are sound. Third, we need to interview the remaining family members, Helena the widow, Rupert Holloway, and this Sheriff Dunlap, when he arrives. And fourth, he paused. Fourth, we need to find that iron box the Blackwood letter mentioned. The truth is sealed in iron, it said. Find the iron box, count the crosses, follow the water. Loyal is already following the water, I said. Should we join him? Wolfe drained his beer and stood up, a process that involves more effort than most people realize when you weigh 1/7 of a ton. Yes, but we go armed and cautious. A murderer who kills once will kill again, especially if we get close to the truth. Caesar, Mars, come. Fritz had prepared outdoor coats for us, and I collected my .32 along with a flashlight and Saul's evidence kit. We descended the back stairs and emerged into the grey October afternoon. The temperature had dropped, and the air smelled of pine needles, wet earth, and approaching winter. The waterfall was even more impressive up close. 40 feet of cascading white water, thundering into a pool that must have been 20 feet across and deep enough to swim in, though the water looked cold enough to stop your heart. Mist rose in clouds, coating the rocks with a slippery sheen. Loyal was still there, working his way carefully along the eastern edge of the pool, where a shelf of rock formed a natural walkway. When he saw us, he barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that meant, "Over here. Important." We picked our way across the wet stones. Caesar and Mars moved with surprising grace for large animals, their claws finding purchase where human feet would slip. Wolfe moved more slowly but with determination, using his walking stick for balance. Loyal had stopped at a section of rock wall behind the waterfall. The shelf we were on continued past the falling water, creating a narrow passage between the cascade and the cliff face. It was slippery, dark, and thoroughly uninviting. "He's found something," I said, "behind the falls." "Obviously. Caesar, stay with Mr. Wolfe. Mars, Loyal, come with me." I edged along the passage, using my flashlight to illuminate the way. The roar of the water was deafening here, and spray soaked my coat in seconds. But Loyal was right. There was something behind the falls. A gap in the rock face. Not quite a cave, more like a deep cleft that extended back into the cliff. I squeezed through the opening, Mars right behind me. The space beyond was bigger than I'd expected, roughly 10 feet deep and 6 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough to stand. The floor was rock, worn smooth by centuries of water, and there, against the back wall, was a metal box. Not iron, as I'd initially thought. Bronze, heavily corroded but intact. About 2 feet long, a foot wide, and a foot deep. Heavy, when I tried to lift it, at least 50 pounds. And stamped on the lid, in letters that time had nearly erased, Blackwood. "Wolfe!" I shouted over the water's roar. "I found it!" It took some maneuvering, but we managed to extract the box and carry it back along the shelf to where Wolfe was waiting with Caesar. He looked at the corroded bronze with the same expression a botanist might use when discovering a new species of orchid. "Excellent work, Loyal," he said. The pitbull's tail wagged once. Then he resumed his alert posture. "Bring it back to the lodge, Archie, carefully. This may contain evidence that's been hidden for 64 years. We made our way back along the rocky shore, and I realized something. The pool at the base of the waterfall was fed by 3 separate streams, each flowing from a different direction before converging at the falls. 3 waters meet at the fall, just like the letter said. The Blackwoods were clever, Wolfe observed as we walked. They hid their most important secrets where the sound of falling water would drown out any excavation noise, where the constant mist would discourage casual exploration, and where the rock formations themselves provided natural concealment. A good choice. Think this box contains the missing fortune? Unlikely. $200,000 in 1891 currency would require considerable space. This box could hold papers, jewelry, perhaps gold coins, but not the bulk of the Blackwood wealth. However, it may contain something more valuable, information. We reached the lodge's back door just as the first drops of fresh rain began to fall. The afternoon had darkened, clouds piling up like dirty wool, and the wind had picked up, moaning through the pine trees with a sound that was definitely not supernatural, but managed to be eerie anyway. Inside, we found the household gathering for dinner. Fritz had commandeered the kitchen and produced a meal that smelled like civilization itself. Roast chicken, root vegetables, and bread that could have won competitions. The family members were assembling in the dining room, a long dark space with more mounted animal heads, and a table that could seat 20. Helena Ashford had finally emerged from her room. She was in her late 50s, well preserved in that wealthy widow way, wearing black that probably cost more than my annual salary. Her eyes were red from crying, but her spine was straight and her expression was carefully neutral. She looked at our group, Wolfe, me, Saul, Fritz, and the 6 dogs, with something between curiosity and resentment. "Mr. Wolfe, I presume? My late husband apparently thought highly of your abilities. I'm not sure I share his enthusiasm for bringing strangers into family business, but Pemberton assures me that Leonard's wishes must be honored." Her voice was cultured, Eastern educated, and cold as the waterfall water. "However, I must insist that those animals not be present during dinner. It's unseemly." "The dogs remain with me," Wolfe said flatly. "They're better behaved than most humans and considerably more trustworthy. If their presence offends you, Mrs. Ashford, I suggest you take your meal elsewhere." A moment of tension, during which Caesar stood up and looked at Helena with an expression that suggested he agreed entirely with Wolfe's assessment. Then Helena sat down with a tight smile. "Very well. Leonard always did have peculiar notions about security. I suppose armed animals are no stranger than most of his ideas. Dinner was awkward, as you'd expect when you have a dead man's family, a murderer somewhere among them, and 6 large dogs watching every move. Marcus drank steadily through the meal. Iris picked at her food and watched everyone else with calculating eyes. Beatrice and Rupert Holloway sat together, speaking to no one, their body language suggesting a marriage built on convenience rather than affection. Helena maintained her icy dignity, and Pemberton Cross took notes in a small leather journal, documenting everything with a lawyer's attention to detail. The dogs distributed themselves strategically around the room, Caesar between Wolfe and the rest of the table, Mars near the door, Apollo by the window, Minerva and Diana at opposite corners, and Loyal, interesting choice, positioned himself directly behind Helena Ashford's chair, where he could observe her without being noticed. "Tell me, Mrs. Ashford," Wolfe said between courses, "did your husband discuss the Blackwood family with you, his research into their disappearance?" "Endlessly," Helena said with bitter precision. "It was his obsession for the past 5 years. He spent thousands of dollars on historical documents, hired researchers, even brought in a surveyor to map the property. He was convinced the Blackwood fortune was still here, hidden somewhere on the estate." "Did he tell you what he'd discovered?" "He said he'd finally solved the mystery. That was 2 weeks ago. He was excited, almost manic. He said we'd all be wealthy beyond imagination once he revealed his findings, but he wouldn't tell me the details. He wanted it to be a surprise, revealed dramatically at the Halloween gathering." She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Now he's dead, and whatever he knew died with him." "Not necessarily," Pemberton Cross interjected. "Leonard left documents with me, sealed instructions to be opened at the will reading. Whatever he discovered, it's recorded there." "Then, why wait?" Marcus demanded, his words slightly slurred. "Why not just read the damn will now and be done with it?" "Because your father specified midnight on October 31st, Cross said patiently. "Those are the legal requirements. If we deviate, the will could be challenged." "Challenged by whom?" Iris asked. "We're all here. Everyone with an interest in the estate is at this table." "Are you?" Wolfe asked quietly. "Are you certain? Because someone killed Leonard Ashford to prevent him from revealing what he'd learned? That person is either in this room or has access to this lodge. Until we know who and why, everyone remains a suspect." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the waterfall and the scrape of silverware. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain began to patter against the windows. The dogs remained alert, watchful. Then headlights swept across the dining room windows. A car was coming up the drive. "That'll be Sheriff Dunlap," Kincaid said from the doorway, where he'd been lurking throughout dinner. He said he'd arrive by 7. "Excellent," Wolfe said. "I'm eager to hear his professional opinion on Leonard Ashford's accidental death. Archie, would you greet the sheriff and bring him to my room after he's had a chance to settle in? I prefer to interview him in private." I collected Caesar and headed for the front entrance, noting that Mars automatically shifted position to maintain coverage of the dining room in Caesar's absence. Professional security, Canine Division. Sheriff Dunlap was exactly what you'd expect from an upstate rural county. Mid-50s, weathered face, practical clothes, and the expression of a man who's seen too much human stupidity to be surprised by anything. He climbed out of a mud-spattered truck and nodded at me. "You'd be Goodwin, I expect. Heard from Cross that Wolfe was coming. Didn't believe it. Man's got a reputation for not leaving his fortress in New York. But here you are, and I assume he's inside with his famous beer and his even more famous attitude." "That's a fair assessment," I admitted, though tonight it's upstate beer from Fritz's supplies, and the attitude is focused on a murder he believes you ruled accidental. Dunlap's expression didn't change. "Let's talk about that, shall we? After I dry off and get some coffee in me. This rain's going to turn to sleet before midnight, and I want to be settled before the roads get worse." He was right. The temperature was dropping fast, and the rain had that heavy, determined quality that promised ice before morning. I helped him carry his overnight bag inside, where Fritz intercepted us with coffee and a towel. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Dunlap was in Wolfe's room, sitting in the second chair, while Wolfe occupied his preferred position by the window. Caesar lay between them like a referee. I took notes from my usual spot near the door. "Let me be clear, Mr. Wolfe," Dunlap began without preamble. I investigated Leonard Ashford's death thoroughly. I found no evidence of foul play. The man was intoxicated, blood alcohol level of 0.22, nearly 3 times the legal limit. He had a severe head wound, consistent with falling and striking the fireplace hearth. There were no defense wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone else was present when he died. I ruled it accidental because that's what the evidence supported. And the candles? Wolfe asked. The symbols carved into the floor, the letter nailed to the door. Theatrical nonsense added after the fact, Dunlap said firmly. Someone, probably Kincaid, though I can't prove it, decided to dress up a simple accident as something mysterious. The candles weren't burning when I arrived. The wax was fresh, maybe a few hours old. The symbols in the floor were carved with a knife or chisel, also post-mortem. As for the letter, he shrugged. Easy enough to forge. Old paper, old ink. Anyone with access to historical documents could do it. You believe Theodore Kincaid staged the entire scene? I believe someone did. Kincaid's the obvious suspect. He had access. He was alone with the body for several hours before reporting it. And he's the one who brought you here with his ghost stories. Smells like publicity seeking to me. Or maybe he's after a share of the estate. Faithful caretaker discovers murder, becomes a hero, gets rewarded. It's not complicated. Wolfe shifted in his chair. Sheriff, you strike me as a competent investigator. Tell me, what happens to the Ashford estate if Leonard's death is ruled accidental versus murder? Different beneficiaries, Dunlap admitted. Cross explained it to me. Leonard's will has 2 versions, one for natural or accidental death, one for murder. If it's accidental, the estate is divided among the family according to a standard distribution. If it's murder, the will contains different instructions, and from what Cross hinted, those instructions involve giving a substantial portion to charity and investigation costs. So yes, certain family members have a strong financial incentive to maintain the accidental death ruling, including the person who actually committed the murder, I pointed out. Dunlap gave me a long look. If there was a murder, which I don't believe, but, he paused, but I'm willing to be wrong. That's why I'm here, and that's why I'm willing to cooperate with your investigation, Mr. Wolfe. Show me evidence of murder, and I'll reopen the case immediately. Until then, my ruling stands. Fair enough, Wolfe said. I have several questions. First, was Leonard Ashford in the habit of heavy drinking? According to his doctor, and I checked, he drank moderately. Wine with dinner, an occasional whiskey. 0.22 is excessive even for an experienced drinker. So either he was celebrating something, or drowning sorrows, or someone ensured he was intoxicated before killing him. Wolfe finished, making the death appear accidental while reducing the victim's ability to resist. Second question, who discovered the body? Kincaid says he found Leonard at approximately 7 a.m. on October 26th. Claims he checked the lodge before bed around midnight on the 25th and saw nothing unusual, but he sleeps in a cottage about 100 yards from the main building, so he wouldn't necessarily hear anything. And the 3 candles with their symbols, when exactly did they appear? Can't say for certain. They weren't there when I examined the scene on the morning of the 26th. But when I returned that afternoon to take final photographs, they were present. Kincaid claims he didn't add them. Nobody else admits to being here. So either Kincaid's lying, or someone came and went without being noticed. Or, I suggested, the murderer never left. They were already here, waiting. Thunder boomed, much closer now. The rain had intensified, hammering against the windows. Caesar's head came up, and I heard Mars bark once from the hallway. His alert signal. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. Not even the faint glow of the security lights that should have kicked in automatically. Just the roar of the waterfall, the sound of rain, and the thunder rolling overhead. Everyone stay calm, I said, reaching for my flashlight. Probably just the generator. A scream cut through the darkness. Female, terrified, coming from somewhere above us. Then another scream, this one ending in a choked gurgle. And in the sudden silence that followed, a voice distant, distorted, barely human, echoed through the lodge. 2 crosses down, 1 more to go. All 6 dogs erupted into action simultaneously. I heard Caesar charge past me toward the door. Mars's heavy footsteps thundered in the hallway. Apollo, Diana, and Minerva converged from different positions. And Loyal was already gone, his lighter, faster footsteps racing up the stairs toward the screams. "Archie, with me. Sheriff, stay with Mr. Wolfe." I grabbed my .32 and followed the sounds of canine pursuit, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Behind me, I heard Wolfe's voice, calm and commanding. "Fritz, check the generator. Saul, secure the ground floor. Sheriff Dunlap, arm yourself. We have a situation." Indeed we did. Murder number 2 had just been committed. And somewhere in the darkness of Crooked Creek Lodge, a killer was laughing. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of sleek Doberman bodies moving with purpose up the stairs. Caesar led the pack, his massive form taking the steps 3 at a time. Mars and Minerva flanked him. Apollo had already disappeared around the corner of the second-floor hallway, and Diana's lighter frame was visible ahead, moving like a shadow. The screaming had stopped, which was somehow worse than if it had continued. I reached the second floor and nearly collided with Marcus Ashford, who was standing in his doorway in pajamas and a robe, looking disoriented. His wife Iris was behind him, clutching his arm. "What's happening?" Marcus demanded. "Who screamed?" "Stay in your room," I ordered. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Mr. Wolfe." I didn't wait for his response. The dogs were converging on a door at the far end of the hallway, the master bedroom, where Helena Ashford had been staying. Caesar reached it first, and didn't hesitate. He slammed his considerable weight against the door, which burst open with a crack of splintering wood. I followed him inside, sweeping my flashlight beam across the room. At first glance, everything looked normal. The bed was made, the curtains were drawn, the furniture was undisturbed. Then, my light found her. Helena Ashford was on the floor beside the bed, lying on her back with her arms spread wide. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with the fixed expression that means death. There was no visible blood, no obvious signs of violence. But arranged around her body, in a precise triangle, were 3 black candles, still burning, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. And on the floor beneath each candle, carved into the wooden planks, was the triple cross symbol. "Don't touch anything," I said, though I was talking more to myself than the dogs. Caesar had already positioned himself between the body and the door, preventing anyone else from entering. Mars flanked the window, checking for escape routes. Loyal had his nose down, sniffing carefully around the perimeter of the candle triangle. I heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple people converging on the scene. I moved to block the doorway, my .32 in hand, and my flashlight pointed at chest level. Beatrice Holloway arrived first, her face pale but composed. "What happened?" I heard. She saw the body and stopped dead. "Oh God, Helena, is she dead?" I confirmed. "Nobody enters this room. That's a crime scene." Rupert Holloway pushed past his wife, started to object, then saw my pistol and thought better of it. Pemberton Cross appeared, took one look, and immediately pulled out his notebook. Iris and Marcus crowded the doorway. "Everyone back," I said firmly. "Now, you're contaminating potential evidence." "Evidence of what?" Beatrice's voice had gone shrill. She had a heart attack, obviously. The shock, the stress, her husband's death. "The candles?" I asked. "The symbols? Those just spontaneously appeared?" She had no answer for that. Saul Panzer arrived, slightly out of breath from running up the stairs. "Ground floor is secure. Fritz has the generator restarted. Lights should come back any second." As if on cue, the overhead fixtures flickered and came to life, harsh electric light replacing the flashlight beams. In the bright light, Helena's death was even more stark. Her face was contorted, her mouth open as if she'd been gasping for air. There were no marks on her neck, no signs of strangulation or violence, but her right hand was clenched tight around something, a piece of paper. Loyal barked once, sharply. I looked at him and saw he'd found something near the window, a faint scuff mark on the wooden floor, as if something had been dragged, and the window itself was open a crack, letting in cold air and rain. "Saul, check that window for prints or disturbance. Don't let anyone contaminate it." Sheriff Dunlap had arrived, his expression grim. He surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen death before. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm going to need you to step back and let me conduct a proper investigation." "Be my guest, Sheriff, but remember, this is murder number 2. The pattern is continuing, just like the legend predicted. Or just like someone wants us to think," Dunlap said. but he was looking at the candles and symbols with new concern. This wasn't any accident. This was staged, carefully staged. Wolfe had finally arrived, moving with surprising speed for a man his size, with Caesar and Fritz. He took in the scene in one comprehensive glance, his eyes missing nothing: the position of the body, the candles, the symbols, Helena's clenched hand, the open window. Archie, what was in her hand? Haven't checked yet, sir. Waiting for the sheriff's authorization. Dunlap nodded. Do it. Carefully. I knelt beside Helena's body, gently pried open her stiff fingers, and extracted the paper. It was old, yellowed, covered in cramped handwriting, and at the bottom, in a different hand, was a signature: Constance Blackwood. It's a letter, I said, scanning the contents quickly. Dated October 27th, written by Constance Blackwood to her brother Jeremiah. She's warning him about something. Says Harrison has become dangerous in his obsession, and that the money has corrupted us all. She's afraid. She says one of us will die before this is over, and I fear it may be me. Wolfe leaned closer. Continue. She writes, I've hidden the proof in the place where Mother kept her secrets. You'll know where when you remember her favorite verse. Count the crosses, follow the water, and look where the light falls at midnight on All Hallows' Eve. That's where the truth is buried. I looked up, and then she signs it. Your loving sister, Constance. May God forgive us all. A treasure map, Iris breathed from the doorway. She's telling them where the Blackwood fortune is hidden, or where the evidence of murder is hidden. Wolfe corrected. Sheriff Dunlap, I submit that Leonard Ashford found this letter, or one like it, and that's why he was killed. Helena must have discovered it among her husband's possessions, and was silenced before she could reveal its contents. But how did she die? Beatrice demanded. There's no wound, no blood. Poison, Saul said quietly from his position by the window. He'd been examining the scene with methodical precision. See the discoloration around her lips, and the way her body is positioned, classic signs of respiratory failure. Something fast-acting, probably administered in her evening tea or before-bed drink. Dunlap was already examining Helena's mouth and hands with professional interest. He's right. This woman was poisoned. Recently, too. Rigor hasn't fully set in yet. Time of death within the last hour, I'd estimate. Which means he stood up and faced the assembled family members. Which means the killer is almost certainly one of you. Because during that hour, we've all been here in this lodge, cut off from the outside world. The silence was absolute except for the sound of the waterfall and the rain. Everyone was looking at everyone else with varying degrees of suspicion and fear. Then Loyal started barking. Not his alert bark, but something different. Urgent. Distressed. He was at the window, pawing at the sill. I went to join him and looked out. The window opened onto a small balcony that overlooked the waterfall, and there, hanging from the balcony railing by a piece of black cloth, was a doll, a crude poppet made of straw and fabric. It wore a tiny dress, and around its neck was a noose. Pinned to its chest was a note written in the same old-fashioned copperplate as the Blackwood letters. One more before midnight. The pattern completes. Jesus, Dunlap whispered. This son of a bitch is really following through. Not Jesus, Wolfe said, and not ghosts. This is a very human murderer with access to historical documents, old materials, and considerable theatrical skill. But they've made a mistake. He pointed at the doll. That cloth. Examine it closely. It's black satin, recently cut, probably from a garment. Trace it, and we'll find our killer. By midnight tomorrow? I asked. That's when the will reading is supposed to happen. If the pattern holds, the third victim dies before then. Wolfe's expression was grim. Then we have less than 24 hours to prevent the final murder and expose the guilty party. Archie, I want every member of this household interviewed individually. Saul, search Leonard Ashford's belongings, anything he left behind, any research notes. Fritz, examine the kitchen carefully. Our poisoner had to prepare the toxin somewhere, and kitchens leave evidence. Sheriff Dunlap, I recommend you seal this room and begin a formal investigation. No one leaves the lodge. Already ahead of you, Dunlap said. But Mr. Wolfe, I'm going to need your full cooperation. This is a homicide investigation now, 2 of them. I'm the law here. And I'm the detective Leonard Ashford, specifically hired to solve this case. Wolfe countered. We'll work together, Sheriff. But understand, I answer to the dead, and they demand justice. I won't rest until this killer is exposed. Thunder cracked overhead, so close it shook the building. The lights flickered but held, and somewhere in the darkness outside, I could have sworn I heard laughter, thin, distant, and thoroughly human. The ghosts of Crooked Creek weren't supernatural, but they were deadly, and we had one day to stop them. Wolfe established our command post in the library, which had the advantages of being defensible, comfortable, and far enough from the crime scene to be neutral territory. Fritz brought coffee, tea, and sandwiches. Nobody had finished dinner after the excitement. The dogs distributed themselves strategically. Caesar at Wolfe's feet, Mars at the door, Apollo by the window, Minerva near the fireplace, Diana prowling the perimeter, and Loyal, interesting choice again, positioned where he could watch the hallway leading to both staircases. It was just past 9 p.m. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and the temperature had dropped to the point where Fritz had started a fire. The waterfall's roar provided constant background noise, which meant private conversations could be held without fear of eavesdropping. Sheriff Dunlap had taken over Helena's room as his official crime scene, photographing, measuring, and collecting evidence with the thoroughness of a man who knew his competence was being questioned. I'd given him my notes and observations, and he'd grudgingly admitted they were useful. "We'll start with Theodore Kincaid," Wolfe announced. "He's been here longest, knows the property best, and discovered both Leonard's body and the mysterious letter. Either he's our killer or he's a reliable witness. Either way, we need his full account." Saul fetched Kincaid, who entered the library looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. His hands were still shaking, and he accepted Fritz's coffee with pathetic gratitude. "Mr. Kincaid," Wolfe began without preamble, "I need you to tell me everything about Leonard Ashford's research into the Blackwood family. Everything he discovered, everything he told you, and most importantly, where he kept his notes." Kincaid wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. "Mr. Ashford was obsessed, like I told you. Started about 5 years ago when he found an old newspaper clipping about the Blackwood disappearance. He hired historians, bought documents, even brought in ground-penetrating radar to search for buried treasure, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. Did he find anything? Not at first, but about 6 months ago, something changed. He found a letter, I don't know where, that mentioned something called the Blackwood Repository. He became convinced that all the family's important documents were hidden somewhere on the property. He started measuring distances, studying old property maps, looking for patterns. And he found something 3 weeks ago," Wolfe prompted. "Yes, sir. He called me into his study. This was at his New York residence, and he was practically vibrating with excitement. He said he'd finally figured it out. The repository wasn't hidden in the house or buried on the grounds. It was concealed in plain sight, somewhere everyone could see but nobody would think to look. He said the answer was in poetry." Poetry. That's what he said. His mother, Mrs. Ashford Sr., who died 20 years ago, was apparently fond of quoting scripture and verse. He said once you knew her favorite poem, the location became obvious. He wouldn't tell me which poem, though, said he wanted it to be a surprise for the family gathering. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Did anyone else know about his discovery? He must have told his wife, and probably his attorney, Mr. Cross. Maybe his sister Beatrice. They were close when they were younger, though they'd become estranged in recent years over money. What about the night Leonard died? Walk me through everything you remember." Kincaid's hands tightened on the mug. October 25th. Mr. Ashford arrived at the lodge around 3 p.m. He was alone. He'd driven himself up from the city. He seemed excited, but also nervous. He had a briefcase with him, wouldn't let me carry it. Said it contained proof that would shock everyone. He spent the afternoon in his study, going through papers. Around 6 p.m., he asked me to prepare a light dinner, just soup and bread. He said he wasn't very hungry. I brought it to him around 7. He'd opened a bottle of whiskey, which was unusual. He normally didn't drink hard liquor. Around 8 p.m., I heard him on the telephone. Couldn't make out the words, but his voice was raised. He sounded angry. The call lasted maybe 10 minutes. After that, everything went quiet. I checked on him around 9 p.m. He was in the main hall, sitting by the fire, still drinking. He looked tired. I asked if he needed anything. He said no, just wanted to be alone with his thoughts. I went to my cottage around 10 p.m. The next morning, I found him dead. "And the candles?" I prompted. "The symbols?" When did those appear? I swear to you, they weren't there when I found the body. I called the sheriff immediately, around 7:15 a.m. He arrived by 9. We both examined the scene. No candles, no symbols, just Mr. Ashford lying on the floor with that terrible wound on his head. But when Sheriff Dunlap came back that afternoon around 4 p.m., the candles were burning and the symbols were carved into the floor. I have no idea how they got there. I was either with the sheriff or in my cottage the entire time. Someone entered the lodge between your discovery of the body and the sheriff's return visit, Wolfe said. Someone with keys, knowledge of the property, and a flair for the theatrical. Who else has access to this lodge, Mr. Kincaid? Just me and the family. Mr. Ashford had the keys changed last year, said he wanted better security. Only 5 sets exist. Mine, his, Mrs. Helena's, his sister Beatrice's, and one kept at the attorney's office in New York. Could anyone have copied those keys? I suppose so, if they got access to them. But I keep mine on me always. And Mr. Ashford was careful about his. Wolfe dismissed Kincaid and sat in silence for several minutes, his eyes closed and his fingers interlaced across his belly. Caesar watched him with the patience of a dog who's learned that his human sometimes needs time to think. Archie, your thoughts? Kincaid's either an excellent actor or he's genuinely terrified. The story about Leonard's telephone call is interesting. Who was he arguing with? And the briefcase full of proof that supposedly shocked everyone. Where is it now? Excellent questions. Saul, have you searched Leonard's study? Thoroughly, Saul reported. No briefcase matching Kincaid's description. Plenty of papers, notebooks, and research materials, but nothing that looks like recently discovered proof. Either the killer took it, or Leonard hid it somewhere else. Or, I suggested, it's in the Blackwood repository, wherever that is. Hidden in plain sight, somewhere everyone can see. A place revealed by poetry. Wolfe opened his eyes. Bring me Pemberton Cross. The attorney knows more than he's told us. Cross arrived within minutes, looking exhausted but alert. He settled into the chair. Kincaid had vacated and accepted coffee from Fritz with a grateful nod. Mr. Cross, Wolfe began, you told Archie that Leonard Ashford left sealed instructions with you. Instructions to be opened at the will reading at midnight tomorrow. I need to know what they contain. I can't reveal that without authorization, Mr. Wolfe. Attorney-client privilege. Your client is dead. 2 people have been murdered. A 3rd death is threatened for tomorrow. I suggest your legal ethics take a back seat to preventing further bloodshed. Cross hesitated, clearly wrestling with professional duty versus moral responsibility. Finally, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. I haven't opened this myself, he said. Leonard's instructions were explicit. This envelope is not to be opened until midnight on October 31st, in the presence of all beneficiaries and witnesses. However, he did tell me verbally what the general contents are. He paused. Leonard believed he'd identified the person who murdered the Blackwood family in 1891. He believed that same person's descendant was now living in this house, benefiting from stolen wealth, and he intended to expose them and demand the return of the Blackwood fortune to its rightful heirs. The rightful heirs being who, exactly? I asked. That's the interesting part. According to Leonard's research, there were distant Blackwood relatives who survived, cousins living in Boston. Their descendants are still alive today. If Leonard could prove the family fortune was stolen and hidden, those descendants would have a legal claim. Which means, Wolfe said slowly, that several people in this lodge have a powerful motive to prevent that revelation. The Ashford family purchased this property and have enjoyed it for 30 years. If they're exposed as beneficiaries of theft and murder, they could lose everything. Not just the property, Cross clarified. According to Leonard's calculations, compound interest and property appreciation over 64 years would put the total value at over $20 million. That's how much the Ashfords might owe if Leonard's accusations were proven. I whistled softly. 20 million reasons to commit murder. No wonder Leonard ended up dead. But who did he suspect? Wolfe demanded. Which family member did he believe was the descendant of the original murderer? Cross's expression was troubled. He didn't tell me. He said the proof was hidden, and he'd reveal everything at the appropriate time. All he said was, the one who loved them most was the one who killed them, and the family secret dies at midnight on Halloween. Those words again. The same phrase from Jeremiah Blackwood's letter, "Beware the one who loved us most." Mr. Cross, one more question. The poem Leonard mentioned to Kincaid. His mother's favorite verse, which supposedly reveals the location of the Blackwood repository. Do you know what poem he was referring to? Cross shook his head. I'm sorry. He never mentioned poetry to me. Though I do remember that Mrs. Ashford Sr., Leonard and Beatrice's mother, was an educated woman, very religious. She died in 1935 before I took over the family's legal affairs. But I believe Beatrice would know. She was close to her mother. Thank you, Mr. Cross. You've been helpful. Please remain available. I may have more questions. After Cross left, Wolfe sat in thought for another few minutes. Then bring me Beatrice Holloway. And Archie, observe her carefully. I have a theory forming, but I need confirmation. Beatrice Holloway entered the library with the bearing of someone visiting an unpleasant dentist, resigned but not happy about it. She'd changed from dinner clothes into something more practical, wool slacks, a heavy sweater, and shoes suitable for rough terrain. Her hair was still pulled back severely, but I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. She sat without invitation, crossed her legs, and fixed Wolfe with a stare that suggested she was accustomed to intimidating people. Unfortunately for her, Wolfe had been stared at by criminals, politicians, and federal agents. One wealthy widow from upstate didn't rate high on his concern meter. Mrs. Holloway, Wolfe began, your brother was murdered 4 days ago. Tonight your sister-in-law was poisoned. You were present in this lodge during both deaths. I need you to explain your whereabouts, your knowledge of your brother's research, and most critically, your relationship with the Blackwood family history. My relationship? Her voice was sharp. I have no relationship with people who died before I was born. The Blackwoods are ancient history. Yet your family purchased their property and have lived on it for 30 years. You've benefited directly from whatever happened to them. And according to Attorney Cross, your brother believed someone in this household is connected to the original murders. I'm curious whether you're that person. Beatrice's face flushed with anger. That's absurd. My family came to this property legitimately. We paid fair price for it in 1923. What happened to the Blackwoods was tragic, but it has nothing to do with us. Then why, Wolfe asked softly, did your brother spend 5 years researching their disappearance? Why did he become obsessed with finding their fortune? And why did he arrange this Halloween gathering specifically to reveal what he'd learned? She was silent for a long moment. Then grudgingly, Leonard was always interested in mysteries. Even as a child, he loved puzzles, treasure hunts, detective stories. When he found that newspaper clipping about the Blackwood fortune, it became a game to him, an intellectual challenge. He had no idea it would consume his life. But it did consume his life, I pointed out. And now it's ended his life. What changed 6 months ago? Kincaid said your brother found something that excited him. Beatrice looked away toward the fire. Minerva, who'd been lying near the hearth, raised her head and watched the woman with those intelligent Doberman eyes. Leonard found Mother's diary, Beatrice said finally, hidden in a lockbox we discovered when cleaning out her old things. She'd written it between 1920 and 1935, nearly everything about her life before she died, and in it she mentioned the Blackwoods. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. What did she say? That our father Leonard and my father Reginald Ashford had known about the Blackwood disappearance, that he'd heard rumors in 1923 when he was negotiating to buy this property. Rumors that the family had been murdered by someone close to them, and that the fortune had been hidden rather than stolen. Mother wrote that father never believed in ghosts, but he did believe in human wickedness. He thought the Blackwoods had been killed by a family member who wanted the money. Did your mother name that family member? No. She said, father never learned the identity, but she wrote something odd. Reginald says the answer is in scripture. The guilty always reveal themselves through pride. Beatrice's voice had gone quiet. Leonard became fixated on that phrase. The answer is in scripture. He started researching what Mother's favorite Bible verses were, what poems she quoted, looking for clues. And he found something, Wolfe said. Yes. 3 weeks ago he called me in great excitement. He said he'd figured it out. Mother's favorite verse was Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He said those words pointed directly to the location of the Blackwood repository, and once he found it, he'd have proof of who the murderer was. Psalm 23, I repeated. How does that point to a location? Beatrice shrugged. I have no idea. Leonard wouldn't tell me. He just laughed and said I'd understand at the Halloween gathering. He was always dramatic like that. Wolfe's expression suggested he knew exactly what Psalm 23 meant in this context. But he wasn't sharing yet. Mrs. Holloway, where were you between 8 and 9 p.m. tonight? In my room, reading. My husband Rupert was with me until about 8:30, when he went downstairs to make phone calls about a business matter. I stayed in our room until I heard the screaming. Can anyone confirm that? My husband can. And Diana. She paused. One of your dogs was in the hallway. The small, fast female. She looked into our room several times, as if checking on us. I glanced at Diana, who was indeed the Doberman most likely to be conducting surveillance. Smart girl. Did you see or hear anything unusual during that hour? The storm, thunder, rain. And I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, but I assumed it was just other people moving around. This lodge is old. It creaks and groans constantly. Hard to distinguish between structural settling and actual movement. What about Helena? Wolfe asked. What was your relationship with your sister-in-law? Beatrice's expression went cold. We tolerated each other. Helena married my brother for his money, and she never pretended otherwise. She was 15 years younger than Leonard, beautiful in a calculating way, and utterly devoted to maintaining her lifestyle. When Leonard started spending fortunes on Blackwood research instead of on her wardrobe and social calendar, she became resentful. They argued constantly these past 2 years. Argued about what, specifically? Money, control, the future of the estate. Helena wanted Leonard to sell this property, said it was a money pit that required too much maintenance. Leonard refused. He said this place held secrets that would make them all wealthy beyond imagination once he unlocked them. Helena called him a fool and a fantasist. Did she know about the Psalm 23 clue? I don't know. Leonard might have told her. He still loved her, despite their arguments. He would have wanted to include her in his triumph. Wolfe was silent for a moment, then shifted his massive bulk. Mrs. Holloway, I'm going to be direct. Your brother was murdered because he was about to expose a 64-year-old crime. Helena was murdered because she either knew his secret or discovered it after his death. Someone in this lodge is terrified of that exposure. You were present for both deaths. You had opportunity. The question is, do you have motive? Beatrice stood up, her face flushed with anger. I had no reason to kill my brother or Helena. Yes, I'll inherit a portion of the estate, but I'm already wealthy. My husband's business is successful, we have no debts, and I don't need Blackwood gold or Ashford properties. If you're looking for someone with motive, talk to Marcus. He's nearly bankrupt from gambling debts. Or talk to his wife Iris, who married into this family expecting luxury and got disappointment instead. Or talk to Rupert, who's invested heavily in land development and needs capital. Don't waste your time interrogating me. She turned and strode toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Wolfe. My mother's diary mentioned something else. She wrote, "The Blackwoods died because someone loved them too much. Love is the most dangerous motive of all, because it justifies anything. Think about that while you're building your theories." She left, closing the door firmly behind her. Caesar made a soft sound, not quite a growl, more like a thoughtful rumble. Wolfe looked down at him. Yes, I agree. Mrs. Holloway is holding something back. But she's also afraid, which suggests she's not our killer. Killers are rarely afraid of exposure. They're confident in their planning. Frightened people make mistakes. So we cross her off the suspect list? I asked. We move her down the list, but we don't eliminate her entirely. Not yet. He turned to Saul. While Archie brings in the next interview subject, I want you to search Mrs. Holloway's room. Look for Mother's diary she mentioned. I want to read it myself. Also check for any old documents, letters or papers that might connect her to the Blackwood family. On it, Saul said, and slipped out quietly. Who's next? I asked. Iris Ashford, the young wife who married for money and found disappointment instead. I'm curious whether her disappointment led to murder. I found Iris in the dining room, sitting alone at the long table with a glass of wine and a distant expression. When I told her Wolfe wanted to speak with her, she smiled that brittle smile and said, "Finally, I've been wondering when he'd get around to me." As we walked to the library, she kept up a stream of light conversation. The weather, the condition of the lodge, the quality of the wine. But her eyes were calculating, measuring me, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I'd tell Wolfe. She settled into the interview chair with practiced grace, crossing her legs and arranging her expression into something between interested and innocent. Loyal, who'd been patrolling the hallway, slipped into the room behind her and took up position near the fireplace, watching her intently. "Mrs. Ashford," Wolfe began, "you married Marcus 3 years ago. What did you know about his family's history when you married him? That they were wealthy, well-connected, and owned extensive property upstate. What else did I need to know? Perhaps that the wealth was dwindling, the connections were fraying, and the property was costing more to maintain than it generated in revenue." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went hard. "I learned those facts after the wedding, yes. Marcus had been economical with the truth during our courtship. But marriage is about more than money, Mr. Wolfe. We loved each other." "Loved," I noted, past tense. "Love changes," she said quietly. "Marriage is difficult when your husband drinks too much, gambles away his trust fund, and expects you to maintain a lifestyle you can no longer afford. I've made accommodations." "Such as?" Wolfe prompted. "Such as learning to live with disappointment. Such as maintaining appearances while the financial foundation crumbles. Such as hoping that someday, somehow, things would improve." She looked directly at Wolfe. "You're wondering if I killed Leonard for the inheritance. The answer is no, but I won't pretend I'm not hoping that his will provides some relief. Marcus and I are drowning in debt. If the estate can pull us out—" She shrugged. "Then Leonard's death, tragic as it is, may be our salvation. Where were you between 8 and 9 p.m. tonight?" "In our room with Marcus. He was drinking. I was reading. We heard the storm, but nothing unusual until the screaming started." "Can Marcus confirm that?" "If he was sober enough to remember. By 8 p.m., he was on his 4th whiskey. By 9, he was barely coherent." Wolfe studied her for a long moment. "Mrs. Ashford, what do you know about Psalm 23? The question clearly surprised her. "The Lord is my shepherd. It's a Bible verse, common enough. Why?" "Because Leonard Ashford believed it pointed to the location of the Blackwood fortune, and shortly after discovering that connection, he was murdered." She sat very still. "I don't understand." "I think you do. I think you're an intelligent woman who's been paying attention to her father-in-law's obsession. I think you've done your own research, drawn your own conclusions, and possibly even found something Leonard missed. The question is, what are you planning to do with that information?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me be more specific. The Blackwood repository, the hidden cache of documents and possibly wealth, is concealed in plain sight, somewhere everyone can see." Those were Leonard's words. "The location is revealed by understanding what Psalm 23 meant to his mother. You've been in this lodge for 2 days, Mrs. Ashford. You've been wandering through rooms looking at everything like you're taking inventory, as Kincaid phrased it. What were you looking for?" Her composure cracked slightly. "All right. Yes, I've been searching. Marcus and I are desperate. If there's money hidden here, real money, not just historical curiosities, then we need it. I'm not ashamed of that. Survival isn't pretty, Mr. Wolfe, but I didn't kill anyone for it." "What have you found?" "Nothing. Just old furniture, hunting trophies, and decades of accumulated junk. If there's a repository, it's better hidden than I can find." Wolfe dismissed her after a few more questions that revealed nothing useful. When she'd gone, he turned to me. "Your assessment?" "Desperate, greedy, but probably not murderous. She'd steal if she could, but killing requires a different kind of commitment." "Agreed. Which leaves us with the final 3 suspects. Marcus himself, Rupert Holloway, and whoever might have accessed this lodge from outside. Unless," he paused, "unless our killer is Kincaid himself, which remains a possibility despite his apparent fear." "What about Psalm 23? I asked. "You know what it means, don't you?" "I have a theory. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." 3 references to water, Archie. The psalm is about water, and this entire property is defined by 3 streams meeting at a waterfall. 3 waters meet at the fall, I recited from the Blackwood letter. So the repository is somewhere near the waterfall. Not near it, in it, or rather, behind it. Remember where Loyal led us? behind the falls, in that cleft where we found the bronze box. I believe that's merely the entrance to the actual repository. There's more hidden there. We need to investigate further. In the middle of the night? During a thunderstorm? First thing tomorrow morning, before the will reading, before the killer can make their final move. We're running out of time, Archie. Tomorrow is October 31st. Halloween. The midnight deadline. The third death is scheduled, and we still don't know who the primary target is or who the killer is. Maybe we should focus on who's next instead of who's guilty, I suggested. If we can identify the third victim and protect them. An excellent thought. But the killer has already proven capable of misdirection and subterfuge. They may not follow the pattern we expect. From the doorway, Mars barked, his alert signal. Someone was coming. Sheriff Dunlap entered, looking grim. Mr. Wolfe, I've finished my preliminary examination of Mrs. Ashford's body. She was definitely poisoned, something that caused rapid respiratory failure. I found traces of a bitter substance in her mouth, consistent with plant-based toxins, and I found this in her bathroom. He held up an evidence bag containing a small bottle. The label was old, faded, but still readable. Hemlock tincture, for medical use only, 1947. Hemlock, Wolfe said. The poison that killed Socrates. Fast-acting, painful, and readily available to anyone with basic knowledge of botany. Where was this bottle? Hidden in the vanity cabinet, behind toiletries. Empty. Someone administered the entire contents to Mrs. Ashford, probably in her evening tea. We found a teacup in her room, also with traces of the tincture. Who prepared her tea? That's the problem. According to what I've learned from questioning the household, Mrs. Ashford made her own tea every night. She had a specific ritual, used a particular brand of chamomile, kept the tea bags and supplies in her room. She didn't trust anyone else to prepare it correctly. Which means, I said, the killer accessed her room, poisoned the tea, and waited for her to drink it. Or they visited her, brought a poisoned drink as a gift, and she consumed it without suspicion, Wolfe countered. Either way, this was premeditated murder. Someone brought that hemlock tincture to this lodge specifically to kill Helena Ashford. Or to kill anyone convenient, Dunlap added. That bottle is old, from 1947. Could have been here for years, left over from medical supplies. Someone just found it and used it. Wolfe shook his head. No, this is too deliberate, too theatrical. The old poison matches the old letters, the old legends. Everything about these murders is designed to invoke the Blackwood ghost story. Our killer is staging a performance, Sheriff, and the final act is scheduled for tomorrow at midnight. Then we'd better figure out who's performing, Dunlap said, before the curtain falls on another corpse. The storm continued through the night, a relentless assault of wind, rain, and thunder that turned Crooked Creek Lodge into an island of light surrounded by wilderness darkness. At 11 p.m., Wolfe announced he was retiring to his room to think without interruption. The dogs maintained their positions, Caesar and Minerva with Wolfe, Mars in the hallway, Apollo patrolling, Diana near the back entrance. And Loyal? He came to find me. I was in my room, going over my notes and trying to piece together the timeline of the murders, when I heard a soft scratch at my door. I opened it to find the pitbull sitting politely in the hallway, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on my face. Need something, boy? He stood up, walked 3 paces down the hallway toward the back stairs, then looked back at me. Come, important. I grabbed my flashlight and 32 and followed him. He led me down the stairs, through the darkened main hall where Helena had died earlier that evening, past the kitchen where Fritz had finally given up trying to maintain normalcy and gone to bed, and out the back door. The rain hit me like a physical assault, cold and vicious. Loyal didn't seem to mind. He trotted ahead confidently, his red coat quickly darkening with water. I pulled up my collar and followed, wondering if I was about to get hypothermia for whatever mystery a dog had discovered. He led me directly to the waterfall, navigating the rocky shore with sure-footed confidence. When we reached the shelf of stone that led behind the falls, he paused and looked back at me, waiting. You want me to go back there, in the dark, in this weather? His expression suggested that yes, that's exactly what he wanted. And did I have a problem with getting slightly wet for the sake of solving a murder? You're a very insistent dog, I muttered, and edged along the shelf. The roar of the waterfall was deafening. The spray soaked me instantly, and the beam of my flashlight barely penetrated the darkness. But Loyal was right. There was something back here we'd missed during our earlier search. The bronze box we'd found had been resting against what I'd thought was the back wall of the cleft. But now, looking more carefully with the flashlight, I could see a gap, a narrow opening that continued deeper into the rock face. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, hidden by shadows and the constant spray. Loyal was already pushing through the gap. I followed, scraping my shoulders against wet stone and cursing whoever had designed this miserable hiding place. On the other side of the gap, the space opened up dramatically. My flashlight revealed a natural cavern, roughly 15 feet across and 12 feet high. The floor was smooth stone, slightly tilted so water drained away through cracks, and along the far wall, protected from moisture by the cavern's depth, were 3 large metal trunks, the old-fashioned kind, with brass corners and heavy locks. "Well, I'll be damned," I breathed. "You found it, Loyal. The Blackwood repository." The first trunk's lock was rusted shut, but a few minutes' work with my pocket knife convinced it to open. Inside, documents, hundreds of them, property deeds, bank statements, business ledgers, letters, all carefully organized and remarkably well preserved, despite the damp environment. The second trunk contained more of the same, plus something interesting, a leather journal with J. Blackwood Private stamped on the cover in gold. The third trunk was locked more securely, with a combination lock that looked newer than the others. Someone had been here recently and reinforced this particular container's security. I couldn't pick a combination lock without proper tools, and trying in this weather seemed like a good way to destroy whatever was inside. Instead, I grabbed the journal and as many documents as I could carry without damaging them, wrapped everything in my waterproof jacket, and followed Loyal back through the gap, along the shelf, and toward the lodge. We were halfway across the rocky shore when I heard it. A sound that wasn't thunder, wasn't the waterfall, wasn't the storm, a human sound. A voice, calling out, "Help! Oh God, someone help!" I ran toward the lodge, Loyal racing ahead. The voice was coming from the second floor, specifically from the wing where the family quarters were located. Inside, chaos. Lights were coming on, dogs were barking, people were shouting. I took the stairs 3 at a time and found a crowd gathered outside Marcus Ashford's room. The door was open. Inside, I could see Marcus on the floor, convulsing. Iris was kneeling beside him, screaming, and on the bedside table, clearly visible, was a glass half full of amber liquid and a bottle of whiskey. "Get back," I shouted. "Everyone back. Don't touch anything." Wolfe had emerged from his room in his pajamas and a robe that could have sheltered a family of 4. Sheriff Dunlap was right behind him, moving with professional urgency. "Poison," Dunlap said immediately. "Same symptoms as Mrs. Ashford. Quick, get him outside. Fresh air. Make him vomit if he's still conscious. Fritz, I need your kitchen. We need to induce vomiting. Get whatever's in his system out." Saul and I grabbed Marcus and dragged him toward the bathroom. He was still conscious, barely, his eyes rolling and his breath coming in desperate gasps. We managed to get enough water down him to trigger vomiting, which was unpleasant for everyone but potentially life-saving. By the time Sheriff Dunlap arrived with emergency supplies, Marcus was breathing more steadily, still sick, still in pain, but alive. "What happened?" Wolfe demanded of Iris, who was sitting on the bed with her face in her hands. "I don't know. We went to bed around 10. Marcus had his usual nightcap, whiskey, from the bottle we keep in the room. He took a drink, said it tasted odd, but finished it anyway. Then about 15 minutes later, he started convulsing. I thought he was having a seizure. I called for help." "The whiskey bottle?" Dunlap interrupted. "Where did it come from?" "It's been in our room since we arrived. We brought it from New York. Nobody else has touched it." "Check it," Wolfe ordered, carefully. "If someone poisoned Marcus's drink, they accessed his room and contaminated his personal supplies." Dunlap handled the bottle with gloves and sniffed carefully. "Hemlock again. Someone added tincture to the whiskey. Not enough to kill immediately, but enough to cause serious harm." "This was the 3rd death," I said. "The pattern completing, but it failed. Marcus survived. Or," Wolfe said thoughtfully, "this wasn't meant to be death number 3 at all. This was a diversion. While we were all focused on Marcus, the real target was somewhere else, unprotected. We all had the same thought simultaneously, and turned toward the hallway. "The dogs!" Wolfe shouted. "Where are they?" I did a quick mental count. Caesar was with Wolfe. He'd followed his master out of the bedroom. Mars was in the hallway. Apollo had responded to the commotion. Diana was coming up the stairs. Minerva was... "Where's Minerva?" I demanded. "She was in my room when I left," Wolfe said, already moving. "Archie with me." We ran back to Wolfe's quarters, Mars and Caesar leading the way. The door was open. I'd left it that way when responding to Iris's screams. Inside, everything looked undisturbed, except for the window, which was wide open, curtains billowing in the rain-soaked wind, and no sign of Minerva. Outside, I was already moving, back down the stairs, the other dogs following. We burst through the back door into the storm. The waterfall's roar was louder in the darkness, amplified by the wind. Rain hammered down, lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape in stark white and black contrast. And there, at the edge of the pool, was Minerva. She was standing over something. No, someone. A person, lying face down on the rocks. Minerva was soaked, her sleek coat streaming water, but her posture was pure guard dog. Nobody gets past me. I reached them first, my flashlight revealing the scene. The person on the ground was Theodore Kincaid. He was unconscious, a nasty gash on his forehead, his arms outstretched toward the water, as if he'd been reaching for something. And floating in the pool, caught on a rock, was a metal briefcase. "Saul," I shouted over the storm, "help me get him inside." Between us, we dragged Kincaid back to the lodge. He was breathing, alive, but badly hurt. Sheriff Dunlap took over immediately, checking for injuries and trying to revive him. Wolfe stood in the back doorway, rain streaming off his enormous frame, looking at the scene with those half-closed eyes that meant his brain was working overtime. "The briefcase," he said quietly. "Archie, retrieve it." I waded into the pool. The water was shockingly cold, and grabbed the case. It was heavy, waterproof, and locked with a combination mechanism. The metal was battered and scratched, and stamped on the side in faded letters was Leonard's missing briefcase, the one containing his proof that would shock everyone. "Kincaid found it," I said, carrying it back to Wolfe. "Or he knew where it was all along. Either way, someone attacked him and tried to prevent him from bringing it inside. Or," Wolfe corrected, "someone attacked him and tried to retrieve the briefcase for themselves. The question is, who knew Kincaid had found it?" From behind us, a voice. "I did." We turned, standing in the doorway, soaked from the storm, and holding a tire iron that was definitely not part of the lodge's regular equipment, was Beatrice Holloway. "I saw Kincaid go out about 20 minutes ago," she said calmly. "I followed him. I saw him swimming in that pool. Actually swimming, in this weather, and come up with that briefcase. I waited until he reached the shore, then I hit him. I was going to take the case, but that dog..." She gestured at Minerva, who was watching her with the same intensity she'd use on a rabbit. "That dog wouldn't let me near it. She stood over Kincaid like a guardian angel and snarled every time I got close. I finally gave up and came back inside." "Why?" I demanded. "Why attack Kincaid?" "Because whatever's in that briefcase cost my brother his life. I want to know what was worth killing for, and if there's evidence in there that incriminates someone in this family," her voice broke, "then I want to see justice done." Sheriff Dunlap had moved to stand beside her, his hand on her arm. "Mrs. Holloway, you just confessed to assault. I'm going to have to detain you." "I don't care. But first, Mr. Wolfe," she looked at him directly, "open that briefcase, please. I need to know the truth." Wolfe studied her for a long moment. Then he took the case from me, examined the combination lock, and smiled thinly. "The combination is simple enough, based on the date the Blackwoods disappeared, October 23rd, 8 or 10, 23, 91. He dialed the numbers. The lock clicked open. Inside the briefcase, documents, photographs, and a handwritten letter addressed to whomever finds this. Wolfe pulled out the letter and began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. My name is Leonard Ashford, and I've discovered the truth about the Blackwood murders, who killed them, why, and where their fortune is hidden. More importantly, I've learned who in my own family is descended from the murderer and has been living off stolen wealth for generations." He paused, then continued. The Blackwoods were killed by their housekeeper, a woman named Margaret Ashford, my own grandmother. She poisoned all three of them with hemlock on October 23rd, 1891, then staged their disappearance to look like they'd fled with the family fortune. She stole their money, assumed Constance Blackwood's identity temporarily to close bank accounts, then disappeared herself and started a new life in Boston. Years later, her son, my father Reginald, bought this property, never knowing it was built on murder and theft. The silence was absolute. Everyone in the lodge had gathered in the hallway, listening. I found proof of all this. Leonard's letter continued. Bank records showing Margaret Ashford depositing the Blackwood funds under a false name, a confession she wrote years later but never delivered. Photographs proving the respectable widow Ashford was actually the Blackwood housekeeper, all of it hidden in the waterfall repository, along with the remaining Blackwood fortune, approximately $4 million in gold and jewelry that Margaret couldn't safely liquidate. If I'm dead, the letter concluded, it means someone in my family discovered what I was planning to reveal. Someone who didn't want the world to know their wealth was built on murder. Find them, make them pay, and return the Blackwood fortune to its rightful heirs, the descendants of Jeremiah, Harrison, and Constance Blackwood. Let justice be served, even if it's 64 years late. Leonard Ashford. Wolfe lowered the letter. Well, that clarifies matters considerably. But it doesn't tell us who the killer is, Dunlap protested. Who in this family knew about Margaret Ashford's crimes? The killer knew, Wolfe said. And more importantly, the killer believed they could prevent the revelation by murdering Leonard, Helena, and staging a third death to complete the legendary pattern. They wanted us to believe in ghosts and curses, not investigate too closely. They wanted the Ashford fortune to remain intact, untainted by scandal. But who? Beatrice started to ask. The one who loved them most, Wolfe said softly. That's what the Blackwood letter said. The one who loved the Ashfords most, who had the most to lose if the truth came out, who possessed the intelligence and ruthlessness to plan 3 murders and make them look supernatural. He turned to look directly at someone standing in the hallway. Mr. Pemberton Cross, attorney, confidant, and, if I'm not mistaken, grandson of Margaret Ashford. Through her daughter's line, you're not just the Ashford family attorney, you're family yourself by blood if not by name, and you murdered Leonard to protect that secret. Pemberton Cross stood very still in the hallway, his expression unreadable. Water dripped from his coat. He'd been outside in the storm too, though when he'd gone out or come back in I couldn't say. The other family members had backed away from him instinctively, creating a circle of space around the elderly attorney. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Wolfe, Cross said quietly. Do you have any evidence to support it? I have logic, observation, and the pattern of behavior that only you could have executed. Shall I explain? Please do. I'm curious how you've constructed this fantasy. Wolfe had moved to the main hall, where he could see everyone gathered. The dogs had positioned themselves strategically, Caesar near Wolfe, Mars at the front entrance, Apollo at the back, Diana by the stairs, Minerva near the kitchen, and Loyal between Cross and the closest exit. Professional containment. The killer needed several things, Wolfe began. First, knowledge of the Blackwood case, not just the legend, but the actual facts. Second, access to this lodge at any time, including keys and familiarity with the property. Third, old materials to stage the supernatural elements, period-appropriate paper, ink, wax, and the hemlock tincture, dated 1940. And fifth, the strongest possible motive to prevent Leonard's revelation. Any of us could fit some of those requirements, Beatrice protested. True, but consider the timing. Leonard contacted Mr. Cross 3 weeks ago with very specific instructions. Those instructions suggested Leonard already suspected he might be murdered and wanted a detective engaged. Why tell his attorney that? Unless Wolfe paused for effect, unless he suspected his attorney might be involved and wanted to create a failsafe, Leonard was giving Cross enough rope to hang himself, if Cross chose to act. Leonard trusted me, Cross said. His voice was still calm, but I noticed his right hand had moved to his coat pocket. Leonard loved you like family, Wolfe corrected, which is why it took him so long to realize the truth. You see, Leonard's research didn't just uncover Margaret Ashford's crimes. It also revealed that Margaret had a daughter, unnamed in most records, but mentioned in a letter Leonard found. That daughter married a man named Cross and moved to New York City, where she had a son, Pemberton Cross Sr., Your father. You're Margaret Ashford's great-grandson. The Ashford family fortune that you've been managing as their attorney, it's built on your great-grandmother's crimes." Cross's face had gone pale, but his expression remained composed. "Even if that were true, and I'm not admitting anything, why would I kill Leonard? His discovery wouldn't cost me my career or reputation. I wasn't responsible for my great-grandmother's actions." "But you were responsible for concealing them," Wolfe said. 3 years ago, when you took over the complete management of the Ashford estate, you discovered certain documents among the family papers. Documents that revealed Margaret's crimes. Instead of disclosing them, you hid them. You allowed the Ashfords to continue enjoying wealth stolen through murder, and you profited handsomely. Your annual fee for estate management is substantial, isn't it? Approximately $200,000 per year, plus bonuses. That's my professional compensation for complex legal work. It's blood money, Wolfe said flatly. And when Leonard started his research and got close to the truth, you knew your comfortable arrangement was threatened. If the Blackwood heirs sued, the entire Ashford estate could be dismantled to make restitution. Your lucrative position would evaporate. Worse, you might face criminal charges for conspiracy and concealment of evidence, so you decided to stop Leonard permanently. This is speculation, Mr. Wolfe. You have no proof. I have your fingerprints on the hemlock bottle, Sheriff Dunlap said, stepping forward. He'd been examining the evidence while Wolfe talked. I lifted them half an hour ago. They match prints from the whiskey glass you used at dinner. You handled that bottle, Mr. Cross. Care to explain why? Cross's composure cracked slightly. I found it in Helena's bathroom after she died. I picked it up to see what it was. That's not a crime. But you didn't report finding it, Dunlap countered. You kept quiet about discovering evidence at a murder scene. Why? Furthermore, Wolfe continued, you made a critical error tonight. When Kincaid was attacked, and Minerva stood guard over him, you were nowhere to be seen. You weren't in your assigned room. You weren't in the common areas. Where were you, Mr. Cross? I was outside, trying to clear my head. The stress of these murders. You were outside trying to retrieve Leonard's briefcase before anyone else could, Wolfe corrected. You knew it was hidden near the waterfall because Leonard told you. He trusted you with that information, never suspecting you'd use it to destroy evidence. But Kincaid got there first, and when you tried to take the case by force, Minerva intervened. A dog's loyalty proved stronger than human greed. Cross's hand was now fully in his coat pocket, his fingers wrapped around something. I shifted my position slightly, making sure I had a clear line to draw my .32 if necessary. Let's say, hypothetically, that your theory is correct, Cross said slowly. Let's say I did realize that my family connection to Margaret Ashford put me in an awkward position. Let's say I did find documents that proved her crimes. What was I supposed to do? Destroy my career, bankrupt my clients, and expose my own family's shame for crimes committed before I was born? You were supposed to uphold the law, Wolfe said. You were supposed to ensure that stolen wealth was returned, and murderers, even dead ones, were exposed. You were supposed to serve justice, not protect your own interests. Justice, Cross laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Leonard Ashford didn't care about justice. He cared about being right. He was going to reveal Margaret's crimes publicly, destroy his family's reputation, and give millions to distant Blackwood relatives who never earned a penny of it. All to satisfy his ego and his love of drama. I couldn't let that happen. So you killed him, I said. Hit him over the head and staged it to look like a drunken accident. I did what was necessary, Cross said quietly. I drugged his whiskey to make him compliant, led him to the main hall with promises of discussing the will, then struck him when his back was turned. Quick, clean. He barely suffered. Then I waited until Kincaid discovered the body and the sheriff ruled it accidental. Everything would have been fine if Helena hadn't started snooping through Leonard's papers. She found copies of some of Margaret's documents and confronted me. I had to silence her too. With hemlock, Wolfe said. Using the same tincture that Margaret herself had used to kill the Blackwoods. A theatrical touch. A fitting touch, Cross corrected. I thought it brought things full circle. 3 Blackwoods died in 1891. 3 Ashfords would die in 1955, completing the pattern. Everyone would believe in the curse and stop investigating. But then Marcus survived. His face twisted with frustration. I didn't put enough hemlock in his whiskey, or he has a stronger constitution than I expected. The 3rd death was supposed to be complete by now. The 3rd death, Wolfe said softly, was never going to be complete. Because I was already watching you, Mr. Cross. I've suspected you since we arrived. An attorney who controls all the estate information, who has keys to the property, who benefits from maintaining the status quo. You were the obvious candidate. I simply needed you to confirm it through your own actions. Cross pulled his hand from his pocket. I tensed, ready to draw my weapon. But what emerged wasn't a gun. It was a small vial, similar to the hemlock bottle but smaller. He held it up for all to see. Cyanide, he said calmly. Fast, effective, and infinitely preferable to trial, prison, and disgrace. My great-grandmother was a murderer. I've become one myself. But I won't let you parade me through courts and newspapers, destroying what's left of my family's dignity. Mr. Cross, don't. Sheriff Dunlap started forward. But Cross was faster. He opened the vial and raised it to his lips. Caesar moved like lightning. The massive Doberman launched himself across the room, covering the distance in 3 powerful bounds. He hit Cross at chest height, knocking the attorney backward. The vial flew from Cross's hand, smashed against the wall, and spilled its deadly contents harmlessly on the wooden floor. Cross went down hard, Caesar standing over him with teeth bared and a growl that promised serious consequences if the attorney moved. Good boy, Wolfe said quietly. Excellent timing. Sheriff Dunlap was already there with handcuffs, pulling Cross to his feet. Pemberton Cross, you're under arrest for 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. You have the right. But I wasn't paying attention to the arrest anymore. I was looking at the family members gathered in the hallway. Beatrice, with tears streaming down her face. Iris looking shocked. Marcus leaning heavily against the wall. Rupert Holloway standing silent and pale. Kincaid, still groggy but conscious, was being tended by Fritz. And I was thinking about what Wolfe had said. The one who loved them most. Cross had loved the Ashford family, loved their money, their prestige, their position, loved them enough to kill to protect them, loved them so much that he couldn't let their reputation be destroyed, even by the truth. Love twisted into obsession, protection transformed into murder, justice denied for the sake of family loyalty. The ghosts of Crooked Creek had been real after all, just not supernatural. They were the ghosts of crimes past, haunting the present, demanding recognition. And now, finally, they could rest. By 3 a.m. the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and air that smelled of wet pine and fresh earth. Sheriff Dunlap had taken Pemberton Cross to his truck and secured him for transport to the county jail, despite Cross's protests that he wanted to make a full confession first. You'll have plenty of time to confess, Dunlap told him. Right now I'm more interested in making sure you don't find another way to cheat justice. The rest of us gathered in the main hall, exhausted but too wired to sleep. Fritz had made coffee and brought out what remained of his excellent bread, along with cheese and cold meat. The dogs had finally relaxed their guard positions, though they remained alert. Caesar stayed close to Wolfe. Minerva had positioned herself near the fireplace, with a visible limp from her exertions, and Loyal sat near me, occasionally leaning against my leg as if checking that I was still there. I still don't understand everything, Beatrice said. She looked older than her years, grief and shock having stripped away her usual composure. Cross killed my brother to protect a secret about our family. But why go through all the theatrical staging? The candles, the symbols, the letters? Misdirection, Wolfe explained. He was settled in the largest chair, a glass of beer somehow procured by the resourceful Fritz. Cross wanted the deaths to appear supernatural, or at least connected to the old Blackwood legend. If everyone believed in the curse, the pattern of murders completing itself, then no one would look closely at the actual mechanics of the crimes. It almost worked. Sheriff Dunlap had ruled Leonard's death accidental, and without our intervention, Helena's poisoning might have been attributed to the same ghostly curse. But you suspected Cross from the beginning? Iris asked. She'd positioned herself close to Marcus, who was still recovering from his near-fatal dose of hemlock. Not from the beginning, but soon after our arrival. Several things aroused my suspicion. First, Cross had exclusive control of Leonard's sealed instructions. He could have altered them to protect himself. Second, he was the only person besides Leonard who knew about the Blackwood repository and its location. Third, he showed no surprise when I mentioned Psalm 23 and its connection to the water. A truly uninformed person would have been confused by that reference. Fourth, And most damning, Wolfe paused to sip his beer. He had the old hemlock tincture. That bottle was dated 1947, suggesting it had been in storage for years. Where would Cross have found such an item? Unless he'd been searching the Ashford estate specifically for old supplies he could use to stage historical murders. The bronze box we found behind the waterfall, I added. It contained Blackwood family documents, but also supplies that Margaret Ashford had hidden. Candles, sealing wax, the original hemlock she'd used. Cross must have discovered that cache years ago when he first took over estate management. He kept it secret but remembered it when he needed materials for his theatrical murders. Rupert Holloway, who'd been silent throughout the evening, finally spoke. What happens now? To the estate, I mean. If Leonard's accusation is correct, if our family's wealth really is built on murder, will we lose everything? Wolfe regarded him coolly. That's for the courts and the Blackwood heirs to determine. But I should point out that the original theft occurred over 60 years ago. Most of the current Ashford wealth was earned legitimately through business and property appreciation. Only the initial capital, the Blackwood fortune Margaret stole, would be subject to restitution. The family might owe substantial money, but you won't be left destitute. That's cold comfort, Beatrice said bitterly. Our family name will be destroyed. Everyone will know we descended from a murderess. Everyone will know the truth, Wolfe corrected. There's a difference. What you do with that truth, how you respond, what restitution you make, how you rebuild your reputation, that's your choice. There's still one thing we haven't addressed, I said. The actual Blackwood fortune. Leonard's letter mentioned $4 million in gold and jewelry hidden in the waterfall repository. The bronze box we found was empty except for documents. Where's the gold? Wolfe smiled, actually smiled, which is rare enough to be noteworthy. Ah, yes, that was the final puzzle. Remember what Leonard wrote in his letter? Find the iron box, count the crosses, follow the water. We found the bronze box, not iron. Note, which contained documents, but the actual fortune was sealed in iron, somewhere that required counting crosses and following water. I believe I know where. He levered himself out of his chair with a grunt. Archie, Saul, Sheriff Dunlap, come with me, and bring the dogs. I suspect we'll need their assistance. We trooped outside into the cold pre-dawn darkness. The waterfall was a silvery ribbon in the starlight, beautiful and mysterious. Wolfe led us to the edge of the pool, then pointed at the rock face to the left of the falls. Count the crosses, he said. Not the carved symbols on the floor or the wax, the actual geological formation. Look. I followed his pointing finger and saw it. Natural striations in the rock, 3 distinct cross patterns where mineral veins intersected. They were subtle, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for, but unmistakable once noticed. 3 crosses marking the way, I said, just like the letter indicated. Precisely. And the 3rd cross, the one furthest left, has something unusual about it. Wolfe indicated a shadow near the base of the rock face, mostly hidden by brush and loose stones. That's not a shadow, that's an opening. It took us 20 minutes to clear away decades of accumulated debris. Underneath we found a narrow passage, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, leading down at a steep angle. Wolfe, sensibly, stayed outside while Saul and I descended with flashlights. The passage opened into a small chamber, maybe 8 feet on each side, with a smooth floor and water-slicked walls, and there, in the center, sitting on a raised platform of carefully stacked stones to keep it above water level, was an iron chest. Not bronze like the first container, not rusted through, solid iron, still sealed, with Blackwood property stamped into the metal. Saul and I exchanged glances. This is it, I said, the actual fortune. Getting the chest out of the chamber was a feat of strength and determination that left both of us soaked and bruised, but finally we hauled it to the surface, where Wolfe and Dunlap waited with the gathered family members. Everyone had followed us outside, unable to resist seeing the conclusion of the 64-year-old mystery. The lock on the iron chest was substantial but old. Sheriff Dunlap managed to break it with a combination of leverage and cursing. The lid groaned open. Gold coins gleamed in the flashlight beams. Old currency, eagles, double eagles, gold certificates, all carefully packed and preserved. Beneath the coins, jewelry boxes containing antique rings, necklaces, brooches. Beneath that, more documents, including what appeared to be stock certificates and property deeds. $4 million, Wolfe said quietly. Perhaps more, given the appreciation of gold and antique jewelry. The Blackwood fortune, hidden by Margaret Ashford after she stole it. She couldn't convert it to currency without arousing suspicion, so she cashed it here, probably planning to retrieve it gradually over the years. But she died before she could, and the secret died with her, until Leonard found the clues and pieced it together. Beatrice knelt beside the chest, tears streaming down her face. All this money, stolen through murder. My grandmother was a monster. Your grandmother was a criminal, Wolfe corrected. But you are not her. None of you are responsible for her crimes. Remember that when the lawsuits begin and the newspapers print their sensational stories, you had no knowledge, no participation, no guilt. This is Margaret Ashford's legacy, not yours. The Blackwood heirs, Sheriff Dunlap said. You mentioned distant relatives. How do we find them? Leonard's research included genealogical records, I said. He'd already traced the Blackwood descendants. They're living in Boston and Connecticut, apparently unaware of their ancestry. They'll be getting quite a surprise. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, that pre-dawn grey that promises sunrise. We'd been awake for nearly 24 hours. We'd solved 2 murders and prevented a third. We'd exposed a 64-year-old crime, and we'd recovered a fortune that most people had believed was lost forever. All in a day's work for Nero Wolfe. Time to return to the city, Wolfe announced. Archie, arrange for transportation as soon as Sheriff Dunlap no longer requires our presence. I want to be back in my brownstone by nightfall. This excursion into the wilderness has been illuminating but exhausting. What about Halloween? I asked. The will reading? That's scheduled for midnight tonight. The will reading is now a legal formality that doesn't require our presence, Wolfe said. Mr. Cross will not be attending, for obvious reasons. Let the Ashford family sort out their inheritance without us. We've done what Leonard asked. We've found his killer and revealed the truth. Our obligation is fulfilled. Beatrice approached Wolfe, her expression complex. Mr. Wolfe, I don't know whether to thank you or curse you. You've destroyed our family's reputation but delivered justice for the Blackwoods. You've cost us millions in restitution but caught a murderer. I've done my job, Wolfe interrupted. Nothing more. Whether you thank me or curse me is irrelevant. The truth exists independent of your feelings about it. Now if you'll excuse me, I need coffee, breakfast, and then approximately 12 hours of sleep. Fritz, start preparing for our departure. As we walked back to the lodge in the growing dawn light, Loyal trotted beside me, his tail wagging contentedly. He'd found the first clue, led me to the bronze box, and indirectly pointed us toward the final cache. Pretty good work for a 45-pound pitbull with a notched ear. You know, I said to him quietly, Wolfe's never going to admit it, but you were the real hero here. Without your nose and instincts, we'd still be stumbling around looking for ghosts. He looked up at me with those intelligent brown eyes and cocked his head, as if to say, I know, but don't tell the Dobermans. They're already insufficiently humble. I laughed and scratched behind his undamaged ear. Some cases you solve through logic and deduction. Some you solve through intimidation and force. And some, the best ones, you solve with the help of a loyal dog who never believed in ghosts. We departed Crooked Creek Lodge at 10 a.m. on Halloween morning, after Sheriff Dunlap had taken our formal statements and released us from the investigation. The iron chest and its contents had been secured as evidence, though Dunlap admitted it would eventually be turned over to the rightful Blackwood heirs once the legal proceedings were complete. The family members were subdued as we loaded the van. Beatrice shook Wolfe's hand with genuine gratitude, mixed with regret. Marcus, still weak from his poisoning, managed a mumbled thanks. Iris looked calculating, probably already planning how to minimize the family's financial losses. Rupert remained silent, his face carved from granite. And Kincaid, bandaged but recovering, simply said, "Thank God someone cared enough to find out the truth." The drive back to Manhattan was quiet. Wolfe read his book. Fritz dozed in the passenger seat. Saul studied his notes, compiling a report. And I drove, with Loyal settled comfortably at my feet, and the other dogs distributed in their usual formation. The city welcomed us back with its familiar chaos, honking horns, aggressive taxi drivers, street vendors, and the peculiar energy that makes New York the center of the universe, despite all evidence to the contrary. We reached West 35th Street, just as the afternoon light was fading. The brownstone looked exactly as we'd left it 3 days ago, which was somehow reassuring. Fritz immediately disappeared into the kitchen to begin restoring order to his domain. Saul headed home with a promise to compile a full written report by Monday. Kowalski helped me unload, accepted his generous payment with gratitude, and drove off. And Wolfe ascended to his plant rooms on the roof, his sanctuary, his laboratory, his escape from the madness of human behavior. The dogs accompanied him part way, then dispersed to their preferred lounging spots. Caesar claimed the office, Mars settled in the hall, Apollo took the front room. Minerva, still limping slightly, allowed Fritz to examine her leg and apply ointment before accepting a place near the kitchen. Diana found a patch of sunlight in Wolfe's bedroom, and Loyal, after careful consideration, chose to stay in the office with me. I sat at my desk and began typing up my notes while the experience was fresh. The office was warm, comfortable, secure. The bulletproof windows kept out the street noise. The reinforced doors kept out the world. The dogs kept out any threat. This was home. At 6 p.m., Wolfe descended from the plant rooms and settled behind his desk with a satisfied grunt. Fritz appeared with beer, and I stopped typing to give my report. The afternoon editions of the papers are already carrying the story. I said, sensational headlines about the Halloween murders, the Crooked Creek curse, and the discovery of the Blackwood fortune. Your name features prominently. Deplorable, Wolfe muttered, but inevitable. Has Inspector Kramer called? 3 times, wants a full briefing. He'll get a written report. I'm not repeating that entire narrative verbally. Sheriff Dunlap also called. Cross is in custody, singing like a canary, now that his suicide attempt failed. Full confession. Names, dates, methods, everything. The district attorney is confident about conviction on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Good. Justice will be served, even if delayed. And one more call, from a lawyer in Boston representing the Blackwood descendants. They want to thank you personally and discuss compensation for your services. Wolfe waved his hand dismissively. The standard fee plus expenses. No more. This wasn't about money. What was it about? He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the beer glass. Truth, Archie. It's always about truth. Leonard Ashford discovered an uncomfortable truth about his family, and was murdered for it. Helena Ashford learned that truth, and was murdered for it. Cross tried to protect comfortable lies through violence, but truth doesn't care about comfort or family loyalty, or protecting reputations. Truth simply exists, and it's our job, mine, yours, the law's, to reveal it, regardless of the consequences. Even when revealing truth destroys innocent people? I asked, thinking of Beatrice and the others who'd learned their family history was built on murder. Especially then, Wolfe said firmly, because innocent is a complicated word. The current Ashfords didn't kill anyone, true, but they benefited from murder and theft. They lived in luxury purchased with Blackwood blood. Returning that stolen wealth, making restitution, that's not punishment, that's justice. The real punishment is knowledge. They'll live the rest of their lives, knowing their prosperity was built on graves. I nodded slowly. It was a harsh philosophy, but consistent with Wolfe's view of the world. Truth above all else, consequences be damned. What about the dogs? I asked, changing the subject. Minerva got hurt protecting us. Do we owe them anything? Wolfe's expression softened slightly. They're family, Archie. Family requires no debt accounting. Minerva will receive the best veterinary care. Caesar, Mars, Apollo, and Diana will get extra portions of beef heart tonight. And Loyal. He looked down at the pitbull, who was watching him with those thoughtful brown eyes. Loyal has earned a permanent place in this household, along with a collar upgrade. Tell Fritz to have the jeweler add his name to the silver plate. He's no longer just a rescue, he's one of us. Loyal's tail thumped once against the floor, as if he understood and approved. At 7 p.m., Fritz called us to dinner. He'd outdone himself, creating a feast that rivaled anything he'd produced in his own kitchen. Roast duck with cherry sauce, wild rice, braised vegetables, and something involving chocolate and cream that I'd need to run 5 miles to justify eating. We ate in the dining room, with the dogs arranged around the table like ancient Roman guards. The conversation was minimal. We were all exhausted, but the silence was comfortable. The food was spectacular, and the sense of a job well done pervaded the room. After dinner, Wolfe retired to his office with a book. I went up to my room, intending to finish my report, but I found myself at the window instead, looking out at the street below where Halloween celebrations were beginning. Kids in costumes paraded past, parents supervising. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed on stoops. The city was alive with the peculiar energy of All Hallows' Eve. And I thought about ghosts. Not the supernatural kind. Those didn't exist, as Wolfe had proven yet again, but the other kind, the ghosts of crimes past, lingering in families like poison in groundwater. The ghosts of secrets kept, lies maintained, truths buried. The Blackwoods had been ghosts for 64 years, their deaths unexplained, their fortune stolen, their murder unavenged. Now finally, they could rest. The truth had been revealed, justice would be served, their stolen wealth would return to their rightful heirs. 3 people had died, Jeremiah, Harrison, and Constance Blackwood, and 3 more had nearly died, Leonard, Helena, and Marcus Ashford. The pattern had tried to complete itself, spanning generations, as if the universe demanded balance. But we'd stopped it. We'd broken the cycle. We'd ensured that justice, however delayed, would finally arrive. And we'd done it with intelligence, determination, and the help of 6 remarkable dogs who understood loyalty better than most humans. I turned from the window and looked at Loyal, who'd followed me upstairs. He was lying near my bed, his white chest blazed bright in the lamplight, his notched ear giving him that rakish appearance that suited his personality. "You know what, boy? Wolfe's right. You earned your place here. Welcome home." He thumped his tail again, once, twice, 3 times. Then he settled his head on his paws and closed his eyes. Outside, the Halloween celebrations continued. Inside, the brownstone was secure, warm and peaceful. The dogs were on guard. Fritz was in his kitchen. Saul had gone home. And Wolfe was in his office, probably already planning which species of orchid deserved his attention tomorrow. Another case closed. Another truth revealed. Another Halloween night in New York City, where ghosts walked the streets in costume and real monsters hid behind lawyers' briefcases and family loyalty. But justice, as always, had the final word. And Nero Wolfe, the stubborn, brilliant, magnificent 7th-of-a-ton detective, had delivered it once again with help from his associates, his household, and 6 dogs who never believed in ghosts. Because truth needs no supernatural explanation. It simply is, and it will always, eventually, come to light.